The hills of Tuscany roll like sleeping giants beneath an endless sky, their slopes painted in shades of amber and olive that shift with the passing clouds. Here, where the earth meets heaven in gentle undulations, time moves differently, measured not by the hurried tick of clocks, but by the slow dance of seasons across the vine-covered terraces. In the spring of 1452, as the last snows melted from the distant peaks and the first wildflowers pushed through the warming soil, a child was born who would one day attempt to capture the very essence of this timeless landscape. But on that April night, as candles flickered in the modest stone house on the outskirts of Vinci, he was simply Leonardo, a bastard son entering a world that had no particular expectations of him. The village of Vinci clings to its hillside like a cluster of sun-warmed stones, its narrow streets winding upward toward the ancient castle that watches over the valley below. It is a place where everyone knows everyone, where the rhythms of life have remained unchanged for generations. The same families tend the same olive groves their grandfathers planted. The same bells call the faithful to the same prayers their great-grandmothers whispered. Into this world of continuity and tradition came Leonardo, the product of a brief liaison between Ser Piero da Vinci, a young notary with ambitions beyond his hilltop village, and Caterina, a peasant girl whose beauty was said to rival the Madonna paintings in the village church. Their son would inherit more than either could have imagined. From his father, a restless intellect and social awareness. From his mother, an intimate connection to the natural world that would shape every drawing, every invention, every moment of wonder that was to come. Ser Piero, 25, and already establishing himself in the respectable world of contracts and legal documents, accepted his bastard son with the casual acknowledgement typical of the age. Illegitimate children were common enough, and Leonardo would be raised in his father's household, alongside the legitimate children who would eventually follow. But this arrangement, born of convenience rather than love, would leave invisible marks on the boy's soul, a sense of existing on the margins, of belonging, and yet not quite belonging. Caterina, barely 18, would marry a local farmer within the year, as was expected. But she remained in Leonardo's early life, a gentle presence who taught him to observe the way morning light caught in dewdrops, the patterns frost made on window glass, the infinite variety of leaves that nature created from the same basic design. In her arms, he learned his first lessons about the interconnectedness of all living things, lessons that no university could have taught. The house where Leonardo spent his earliest years sits on a gentle slope overlooking the Arno Valley, its thick stone walls keeping the rooms cool in summer and warm in winter. From the kitchen window, one can see for miles across a landscape that seems to breathe with ancient life. Cypress trees mark the boundaries of fields, like dark punctuation marks against the golden parchment of the earth. Olive groves shimmer silver-green in the breeze. And always, threading through it all, like a life-giving serpent, the Arno River catches and scatters the sunlight as it flows toward Florence and the sea. It was here, in this marriage of human habitation and natural beauty, that Leonardo's extraordinary gift for observation first began to develop. While other children played with wooden toys or chased chickens through the courtyard, he would sit for hours watching the way shadows moved across the walls. or the patterns that water made as it flowed over stones in the garden fountain. His grandfather, Antonio, was perhaps the first to recognize something unusual in the boy. A man who had spent his life working the land, Antonio possessed the deep patience of someone who understands that the most important things cannot be hurried. He would take young Leonardo on long walks through the countryside, saying little, but pointing out the small miracles that city dwellers rarely notice: the perfect spiral of a snail's shell, the mathematical precision of a pine cone, the way a bird's wing is engineered for both strength and lightness. "Everything teaches us," Antonio would say in his quiet way, "if we know how to look." Under his grandfather's gentle guidance, Leonardo learned to see the world as a vast book written in a language of forms and patterns, a language that spoke of underlying principles and hidden connections. He began to understand that the same forces that shaped the curve of a river also determined the curve of a bird's flight path, that the branching of blood vessels in a leaf mirrored the branching of rivers through the valley. The boy's hunger for understanding was insatiable. He would bring home stones of unusual shape, feathers of remarkable color, dried flowers whose forms intrigued him. His small room became a museum of natural wonders, each object a question waiting to be answered. Why did some leaves have smooth edges while others were serrated? How did birds know when to migrate? What made the sky blue on clear days but grey before storms? These were not the typical concerns of a peasant child, and they did not go unnoticed in the small community of Vinci. The boy was clearly intelligent, but his intelligence expressed itself in ways that sometimes made the adults uncomfortable. He was left-handed, which in that superstitious age carried unfortunate connotations. He asked questions that had no easy answers, and he had a habit of staring at clouds, at faces, at the play of light on water, with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. The local priest, Father Benedetto, took a cautious interest in the boy. Leonardo's questions about creation and the natural world showed a mind grappling with profound mysteries, but they also demonstrated a tendency toward independent thinking that could, if unchecked, lead in dangerous directions. During his visits to the village church, Leonardo would spend long minutes studying the painted saints on the walls, not in reverence, but with the critical eye of someone trying to understand how the illusion of three-dimensional form had been created on a flat surface. "The boy sees too much," Father Benedetto confided to Ser Piero one autumn evening. "It is a gift, perhaps, but gifts can be burdens if not properly guided." Ser Piero, whose own ambitions were pulling him increasingly toward Florence and the opportunities that awaited there, began to consider his bastard son's future with new attention. The boy was clearly too intelligent for a peasant's life, but his illegitimate birth barred him from following his father into the legal profession. What then? The church, perhaps, though Leonardo's questions suggested a mind that might struggle with blind faith. A craftsman's guild, maybe, though which one? The answer, when it came, arrived with the changing light of late adolescence. Leonardo had reached his 14th year, tall for his age, and possessed of an almost otherworldly beauty that made people stop and stare. His hair, golden brown like autumn leaves, fell in waves to his shoulders. His eyes, grey-green like the olive groves in morning mist, seemed to hold depths that belied his years. But it was his hands that truly marked him as different, long-fingered, graceful, and steady. They moved with a precision that spoke of innate understanding. It was these hands that finally determined his destiny. One day, while helping his grandfather repair a broken statue in the village church, Leonardo casually began sketching the damaged angel's face, showing not just what was there, but what should be there, revealing the ideal form that lay hidden beneath centuries of weathering and amateur repairs. Father Benedetto, watching over the boy's shoulder, felt a chill of recognition. "Ser Piero," he said that evening, "your son has been given a rare gift. It would be a sin to waste it in these hills." And so, as the summer of 1466 drew to a close, arrangements were made. Leonardo would go to Florence, to the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, to begin his apprenticeship as an artist. The boy who had spent his childhood learning to read the book of nature would now learn to translate that reading into forms that could speak to the human heart. On his last morning in Vinci, Leonardo climbed the hill behind his house to watch the sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and rose. The landscape spread below him like a promise, beautiful, eternal, and somehow patient, as if it knew that he would return one day, changed by experience, but still connected to these rolling hills by invisible threads of memory and love. He was leaving as a child of Vinci, shaped by its rhythms and its peace. He would return many years later as something else entirely, a man who had seen the heights of fame and the depths of frustration, who had touched greatness and been touched by it in return. But in that moment, watching the morning light awaken the world he had always known, he was still simply Leonardo, a boy with curious eyes and steady hands, standing on the threshold between one life and another. The bells of Vinci began to toll the hour, their bronze voices carrying across the valley as they had for centuries. Soon he would hear different bells in a different city, calling him to a different destiny. But these bells, the ones that had measured his childhood, would echo in his memory forever, a reminder of the place where he first learned to see, to question, and to wonder at the magnificent complexity of the world that lay waiting to be understood. Florence in 1466 is a symphony of hammers and chisels, of grinding pigments and bubbling vats of dye. The city breathes with an energy that would overwhelm a boy from the quiet hills of Vinci, if that boy were anyone other than Leonardo. But as he walks through the narrow streets for the first time, his eyes wide with wonder, yet somehow unsurprised, it becomes clear that he has found not just a new home, but the stage upon which his extraordinary gifts will first unfold. The workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio sits like a beating heart in the artistic quarter of the city, its large windows facing north to catch the steady, even light that painters prize above all else. From the street, the sounds emerge in a constant rhythm, the scrape of charcoal on paper, the soft brush of bristles against canvas, the patient tap-tap-tap of chisel against stone. This is where dreams take shape, where the visions that dance in artists' minds find their way into the physical world. Leonardo arrives on a morning when the autumn light slants golden through the workshop windows, illuminating motes of marble dust that float like stars in the air. He carries little, a small bundle of clothes, a few sketches from his childhood, and a letter from his father to Verrocchio. But he brings with him something more precious than any material possession. Those eyes that have learned to see, and those hands that have learned to translate seeing into understanding. Andrea del Verrocchio is 41 years old, at the height of his powers and reputation. He is not just a painter, but a complete artist, sculptor, goldsmith, engineer, musician, a man who embodies the Renaissance ideal that all knowledge is connected, that beauty emerges from the marriage of technical skill and deep understanding. When he first sees Leonardo, something passes between them, a recognition that transcends the ordinary relationship between master and apprentice. "Your father tells me you can draw," Verrocchio says simply, his weathered hands still holding the brush he has been using to work on a commission for the Medici family. "Show me." Leonardo produces one of his sketches from Vinci, a study of his grandfather's hands, drawn with the patient attention to detail that has already become his signature. The lines are confident despite his youth, capturing not just the surface appearance of those weathered fingers, but something deeper, the weight of years, the memory of labor, the gentle strength that has shaped countless things with care. Verrocchio studies the drawing in silence, his experienced eye noting the way the boy has understood the structure beneath the surface, the way light and shadow have been used not just to create form, but to suggest character. This is not the work of a talented child copying what he sees. This is the work of someone who understands that drawing is a form of thinking, a way of discovering truths that cannot be expressed in words. "You will start tomorrow," he says finally. "Bring nothing but your willingness to learn everything." The workshop becomes Leonardo's universe. It is a place where the boundaries between art and science dissolve, where beauty and utility dance together in perfect harmony. Here, painters must understand anatomy to capture the human form convincingly. Sculptors must comprehend engineering to create works that will stand for centuries. Everyone must master chemistry to mix pigments that will hold their colors against the assault of time. Leonardo absorbs it all with the hunger of someone who has finally found his element. He learns to grind lapis lazuli into ultramarine blue, a process that requires patience and precision. Too much pressure, and the precious stone becomes worthless powder. Too little, and the color lacks intensity. He masters the art of preparing canvases, laying down layer after layer of gesso until the surface is smooth as silk, yet perfectly receptive to paint. He studies the way egg tempera behaves differently from oil paint, how each medium has its own personality, its own demands and gifts. But it is in drawing that Leonardo's genius first becomes unmistakable. While other apprentices struggle to capture basic proportions, he is already exploring the subtle relationships between structure and surface, between what is and what appears to be. His sketchbooks fill with studies that go far beyond the assigned exercises, hands emerging from shadow, eyes that seem to hold actual thoughts, drapery that flows with a life of its own. Verrocchio, watching his youngest apprentice work, begins to understand that he has been given a rare privilege. In nearly 20 years of teaching, he has trained many skilled craftsmen, even a few genuine artists. But Leonardo is something different, a force of nature disguised as a 14-year-old boy, someone who doesn't just learn techniques, but seems to divine the principles that underlie all technique. The other apprentices notice, too. There is Sandro Botticelli, several years older and already showing signs of the lyrical style that will make him famous. There is Pietro Perugino, methodical and precise, destined to become one of the most sought-after painters of his generation. There is Lorenzo di Credi, closest to Leonardo in age and temperament, who will become both friend and gentle rival. Together, they form a community of young men united by their dedication to beauty and their willingness to sacrifice everything in its pursuit. But even in this company of exceptional talents, Leonardo stands apart. It is not just his skill, though that develops at an astonishing pace. It is his curiosity, his refusal to accept that anything is simply the way it is done. When Verrocchio teaches the traditional methods for painting water, Leonardo spends hours by the Arno, sketching the patterns that currents make around rocks, the way light fractures when it hits a flowing surface. When the workshop receives a commission for a bronze horse, Leonardo dissects the mechanics of equine movement with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts. "Why do you need to understand so much?" Lorenzo di Credi asks him one evening as they clean brushes together, the workshop settling into the peaceful quiet that comes after a day of concentrated work. "Is it not enough to paint what we see?" Leonardo pauses, considering. At 15, he is already taller than most of the men in the workshop, his golden hair catching the last light from the windows. When he speaks, his voice carries the thoughtful cadence that will characterize all his conversations throughout his life. "What we see is only the surface of truth," he says finally. "To paint the human form convincingly, must we not understand how the muscles attach to the bones? To paint flowing water, should we not comprehend the forces that give it motion? Everything connects to everything else. The more we understand, the more truthfully we can create." It is a philosophy that will guide him for the rest of his life, though he doesn't yet know how far it will carry him from the traditional role of the Renaissance artist. For now, it simply drives him to excel in every aspect of his training, to push beyond the boundaries of what is expected from an apprentice. His first major test comes in the winter of 1469, when Verrocchio receives a commission for an altarpiece depicting the baptism of Christ. It is an important work, destined for the church of San Salvi, and Verrocchio decides to involve his most promising students in its creation. To Leonardo falls the task of painting one of the angels kneeling beside the river Jordan. The young artist approaches the assignment with characteristic thoroughness. He studies every existing depiction of angels he can find, noting how different artists have attempted to suggest divine nature through purely human features. He sketches children and young men, searching for that quality of innocent beauty that can serve as a bridge between earthly and heavenly realms. Most importantly, he experiments with a new technique, oil painting, that is just beginning to find its way to Florence from the workshops of Flanders. Oil paint allows for subtleties that egg tempera cannot achieve. Colors can be built up in transparent layers, creating depths of shadow and brilliance of light that seem almost supernatural. Most crucially for Leonardo, it allows for the soft transitions between light and dark that he has observed in nature but struggled to capture with traditional media. When the angel is complete, the workshop falls silent. Verrocchio, examining his student's work, feels a complex mix of pride and something approaching awe. The figure is technically perfect, but technical perfection is only the beginning. The angel seems to breathe with life, its expression conveying not just beauty, but intelligence, compassion, and a kind of divine awareness that makes the viewer feel they are in the presence of something truly sacred. More than that, the painting technique itself represents a breakthrough. The soft modeling of the flesh, the way light seems to emanate from within the figure rather than simply falling upon it from outside. These effects point toward artistic possibilities that have never been fully explored. The story, perhaps apocryphal, but too perfect not to repeat, holds that Verrocchio was so moved by his student's achievement that he laid down his brushes and never painted again, declaring that the student had surpassed the master. Whether true or not, the tale captures something essential about this moment: the recognition that a new kind of artist has emerged, one whose vision extends beyond craft into realms of understanding that will redefine what art can be. But Leonardo himself seems almost unconscious of having achieved anything remarkable. As soon as the angel is finished, he is already absorbed in the next challenge, the next question. He has begun to dissect the corpses of animals, studying the architecture of bone and muscle with the same intensity he once brought to observing leaves and stones in Vinci. He fills notebook after notebook with observations about the behavior of light, the properties of water, the mechanics of flight. His fellow apprentices watch with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment as he transforms from a country boy into something unprecedented. An artist who is also a scientist, a creator who insists on understanding the deepest principles of creation itself. They sense that they are witnessing the birth of something new, though none of them can yet imagine how far his restless intellect will carry him from the comfortable traditions of their craft. The workshop continues its daily rhythms, the grinding of pigments, the stretching of canvases, the patient building up of layer upon layer of paint and varnish. But beneath these familiar surfaces, something revolutionary is stirring. In the careful observations of a young man from Vinci, in his refusal to accept easy answers, in his conviction that art and knowledge are two faces of the same coin, the future is taking shape. Florence, with its magnificent palaces and its fierce political rivalries, its brilliant artists and its calculating merchants, provides the perfect stage for this transformation. The city that has already given birth to so much that is beautiful and enduring is about to witness the emergence of a mind that will push the boundaries of human achievement further than anyone has dared to imagine. In the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, as the master watches his extraordinary apprentice bend over yet another sheet of paper, filling it with observations and ideas, the Renaissance is preparing to meet its greatest exemplar. The boy from Vinci is becoming Leonardo, and the world will never be quite the same. In the quiet hours before dawn, when Florence sleeps and the workshop lies empty except for shadows and moonlight, Leonardo writes by candlelight. His left hand moves across the paper in smooth, confident strokes, filling page after page with words that flow from right to left, readable only in a mirror, a secret language that protects his thoughts from casual observers and perhaps from himself. The notebooks multiply around him like living things, small volumes bound in leather that he carries everywhere, larger folios for more complex diagrams, loose sheets covered with sketches that capture fleeting observations before they can escape. Each page is a window into a mind that refuses to accept the world as it appears, that insists on understanding the hidden mechanisms that drive all visible phenomena. Tonight, as he has for countless nights since arriving in Florence 7 years ago, Leonardo is thinking about flight. Above him, invisible in the darkness, birds navigate the sky with an ease that seems almost supernatural. They rise and fall, turn and soar, master the invisible ocean of air as effortlessly as fish swimming through water. How do they do it? What principles govern their movement through that most intangible of elements? And the question that haunts him, could those same principles be applied to allow human beings to join them in their aerial dance? The idea is not entirely original. Since ancient times, humans have dreamed of flight. The myth of Icarus warns of its dangers, while countless folk tales speak of magical carpets and winged horses that carry heroes through the heavens. But Leonardo approaches the problem with a different kind of thinking. Not through magic or wishful thinking, but through careful observation and logical analysis. He begins, as he always does, with what he can see. Birds. Day after day, he watches them. Pigeons in the workshop courtyard, hawks circling above the Arno, the great flocks of migrating cranes that pass over Florence each spring and autumn. His notebooks fill with sketches, wings captured in every phase of their complex motion, tail feathers spread for steering, the subtle adjustments of posture that allow for changes in speed and direction. But observation alone is not enough. Leonardo needs to understand the invisible forces at work, the relationship between wing and air that creates the miracle of flight. He studies the structure of feathers, noting how they overlap to create surfaces that are both flexible and strong, how they can trap air during the downstroke and allow it to pass through during the upstroke. He examines the hollow bones that keep birds light without sacrificing strength, the powerful muscles that drive their wings through the complex figure-8 pattern that produces both lift and forward motion. His drawings become increasingly sophisticated, moving beyond simple representation toward analytical illustration. He sketches wings from below and above in cross-section and exploded view, showing not just what they look like, but how they work. Each diagram is accompanied by notes written in his mirror script, observations and questions that reveal a mind grappling with principles that will not be formally understood for centuries to come. The bird is an instrument working according to mathematical law, he writes, which it is within the capacity of man to reproduce with all its movements, but not with a corresponding degree of strength. We may therefore say that such an instrument constructed by man is lacking in nothing except the life of the bird, and this life must be supplied from that of man. It is a profound insight, one that recognizes both the possibility and the limitation of human flight. The mechanics can be understood and reproduced, but the power source, the life force that drives those mechanics, must be different. Birds are perfectly adapted to their aerial environment, their entire beings optimized for flight. Humans, earthbound creatures with heavy bones and relatively weak muscles, will need to find another way. This realization leads Leonardo to his first serious attempts at designing flying machines. Working by candlelight in his small room above the workshop, he sketches apparatus after apparatus, each one an attempt to solve the fundamental problem of getting a human being safely into the air and keeping them there. His earliest designs are essentially artificial birds, mechanical wings that a human operator could strap to their arms and work through a system of pulleys and levers. The drawings show figures lying prone on wooden frameworks, their arms and legs connected to enormous bat-like wings through an intricate network of ropes and gears. The concept is logical. If birds fly by flapping their wings, then mechanical wings operated by human power should achieve the same result. But as his understanding deepens, Leonardo begins to recognize the flaws in this approach. The human body simply cannot generate the power-to-weight ratio necessary for sustained flapping flight. A man's muscles, however strong, cannot match the efficiency of a sparrow's breast muscles relative to body weight. The mechanical wings would have to be enormous to provide sufficient lift, but their size would make them impossibly heavy and difficult to operate. This recognition leads to a crucial shift in his thinking. If direct imitation of birds is impractical, perhaps the principles they employ could be applied in different ways. He begins to explore concepts that seem almost modern in their sophistication. Fixed-wing aircraft that use forward motion to generate lift, helicopter-like devices with rotating wings, even primitive parachutes for safe descent. One design, sketched with particular care and annotated with detailed calculations, shows what he calls an aerial screw, a large helical surface that would, in theory, drill its way up through the air like a screw advancing through wood. 4 men would operate it by running around a central platform, their combined effort turning the massive spiral wing above their heads. Leonardo believes that if spun fast enough, this aerial screw could lift itself and its operators into the sky. The mathematics are optimistic rather than accurate, but the principle is sound. He has intuited, 4 centuries before the Wright brothers, that powered flight is possible, that the right combination of lift and thrust can overcome the pull of gravity. More remarkably, he has envisioned the helicopter, an aircraft that will not successfully take to the air until the middle of the 20th century. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind working at the very limits of contemporary knowledge, pushing into territories that will not be systematically explored until the age of modern aviation. He calculates the surface area needed to support a given weight in the air, experiments with different wing shapes and their effects on lift and drag, even considers the problem of steering and control that will prove so crucial to the eventual achievement of flight. But Leonardo's dreams extend beyond mere mechanical flight. In his more visionary moments, he imagines a world transformed by aerial travel, cities connected by routes through the sky, armies that move through the clouds, commerce that flows along highways of air. He sketches maps showing flight paths over the Italian peninsula, calculates the time it would take to travel from Florence to Milan by air rather than by the dusty roads that currently make such journeys an ordeal of days or weeks. These are dreams that will not be realized in his lifetime or in the lifetimes of his grandchildren's grandchildren. But they represent something profound, a refusal to accept the limitations that have always constrained human existence. In his notebooks, written by candlelight in that small room above Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo is not just imagining flying machines, he is reimagining what it means to be human. The irony is not lost on him. Here he is, an artist whose greatest works will celebrate the beauty of the earth-bound world, the gentle landscapes of Tuscany, the complex emotions that play across human faces, the intricate details of flowers and flowing water. Yet his deepest obsession is with escape, with the possibility of rising above the world he paints so lovingly. Perhaps this contradiction drives his creativity. His art gains depth from his scientific investigations, while his scientific work is informed by the artist's eye for beauty and proportion. The same hand that can capture the subtle play of light on the Mona Lisa's cheek can diagram the mechanics of bird flight with equal precision and insight. As the months pass, Leonardo's reputation in Florence grows. His artistic skills are already exceptional, but word is beginning to spread of his other interests. Learned men seek him out to discuss questions of mechanics and mathematics. Wealthy patrons commission him not just for paintings, but for engineering projects, fortifications, canal systems, elaborate stage sets for court entertainments. Yet he continues to return again and again to the problem of flight. His notebooks multiply, filled with an increasingly sophisticated understanding of aerodynamics, structural engineering, and human anatomy as it relates to the operation of flying machines. He designs wings with adjustable surfaces for steering, landing gear that can be retracted to reduce drag, even primitive instruments for aerial navigation. Some of his designs are practical enough that modern reconstructions have actually gotten off the ground, if only briefly. Others are flights of pure imagination, impossible dreams rendered with the same careful attention to detail that he brings to his anatomical studies. All of them represent attempts to bridge the gap between the world as it is and the world as it could be. In the margins of one notebook, surrounded by diagrams of wing structures and calculations of lifting surfaces, Leonardo writes a single sentence that captures the essence of his obsession. "There shall be wings. If the accomplishment be not for me, 'tis for some other." It is a statement of faith as much as prediction. Faith that human ingenuity can overcome any obstacle, that the dreams sketched in these pages will someday become reality. He will never see his flying machines take to the air, never experience the joy of soaring above the Tuscan hills that shaped his childhood. But in imagining these possibilities, in working through the mechanical and mathematical problems they present, he is preparing the way for those who will follow. 400 years later, as the first powered aircraft lifts off from the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk, the shadow of Leonardo's wings will stretch across that historic moment. The Wright brothers, like countless inventors before them, will be building on foundations laid by a young man in a Florence workshop, working by candlelight, dreaming of flight, and refusing to accept that dreams must always remain earthbound. Tonight, as every night, Leonardo writes until the candle burns low and his eyes grow too tired to focus on the page. Tomorrow he will return to his easel, mixing pigments and building up layers of paint with the same patient attention to detail that he brings to his mechanical diagrams. But the notebooks will remain beside him, ready for the next observation, the next insight, the next small step toward transforming an impossible dream into inevitable reality. The birds outside his window sleep now, their wings folded, their flight suspended until dawn calls them back to the sky. But in the pages scattered around his desk, other wings are taking shape. Wings of wood and canvas, operated by human hands and powered by human dreams, carrying their earth-bound creators toward horizons that have never been explored. The commission arrives on a morning when spring light floods through the tall windows of Leonardo's newly established workshop, illuminating the dust motes that dance above his easels like tiny suspended worlds. He is 29 now, no longer Verrocchio's apprentice, but a master in his own right, with the Guild of St. Luke's official blessing and a growing reputation that draws patrons from across Florence and beyond. The Augustinian monks of San Donato a Scopeto have chosen him to paint an altarpiece, the Adoration of the Magi, a subject that has challenged and inspired artists for centuries. It should be a straightforward commission, the three wise men presenting their gifts to the Christ child, surrounded by the usual array of angels, shepherds, and attendant figures. But Leonardo, as those who know him have learned to expect, approaches even traditional subjects with an eye that sees possibilities others miss. In his preliminary sketches, the familiar scene begins to transform. Rather than the static, symmetrical arrangement that convention demands, Leonardo envisions something more dynamic, more psychologically complex. The Magi will not simply kneel in reverence, they will embody different responses to the divine presence before them. One will approach with the confidence of worldly authority meeting its match. Another will display the wonder of intellectual understanding encountering mystery. The third will show the humility of age before eternal youth. But the true innovation lies not in the individual figures, but in their arrangement. Leonardo has been experimenting with the mathematical principles of composition, exploring how the eye moves across a painted surface, and how that movement can be guided to create emotional as well as visual impact. He places the Holy Family at the center of a complex spiral of figures, each group connected to the next by subtle gestures, glances, and movements that draw the viewer's attention in a continuous, circular path. The concept is revolutionary. Rather than presenting the scene as a collection of separate elements, Mary here, the Magi there, angels scattered throughout, Leonardo creates a unified organism in which every part relates to every other part. It is composition as living architecture, as visual music that plays out across the surface of the panel. His notebooks from this period reveal the intensity of his preparation. Page after page fills with studies of horses and their riders, of faces caught in moments of wonder or reverence, of hands positioned to convey specific emotions through gesture alone. He sketches architectural backgrounds, explores lighting effects, even draws detailed plans showing how the perspective lines will converge to focus attention on the Christ child's face. The mathematical precision underlying these artistic choices reflects his deepening understanding of perspective, not merely as a tool for creating the illusion of depth, but as a language for expressing philosophical ideas. The vanishing point, toward which all the composition's lines converge, becomes a visual metaphor for divine unity. The careful positioning of figures at different distances from this central point suggests their varying degrees of spiritual understanding. But Leonardo's genius lies in making these complex theoretical concepts serve the painting's emotional purpose. When viewers look at his adoration, they don't see mathematical exercises. They experience the awe and confusion of mortals confronting the divine. The crowd presses forward with desperate hunger for meaning. Horses rear and plunge as if sensing the cosmic significance of the moment. Even the landscape itself seems to pulse with anticipation. Working on the underpainting, Leonardo develops techniques that will influence artists for generations. Instead of the traditional method of building up colors gradually from light to dark, he begins with a rich brown underdrawing that establishes all the essential relationships of light and shadow. This chiaroscuro approach, literally light-dark, allows for subtler modeling of forms and more convincing integration of figures with their environment. The results are immediately apparent to anyone who visits his workshop. Lorenzo de' Medici himself comes to observe the work in progress, accompanied by the usual retinue of courtiers, scholars, and fellow artists. Standing before the emerging composition, Lorenzo recognizes something unprecedented, a painting that functions simultaneously as religious art, mathematical demonstration, and psychological study. "You have painted not just the event," he observes, "but the experience of witnessing it." It is an astute comment, one that captures the essence of Leonardo's revolutionary approach. Previous artists had focused on depicting the adoration as historical fact or theological symbol. Leonardo shows it as human drama, full of the complexity and contradictions that characterize all genuine encounters with the transcendent. Yet even as he pushes painting toward new possibilities, Leonardo finds himself pulled in other directions. His scientific curiosities, far from diminishing as his artistic reputation grows, seem to multiply and intensify. The same analytical mind that can orchestrate the psychological dynamics of the adoration is equally fascinated by the mechanical principles governing the movement of water, the anatomical structures that produce facial expressions, the optical phenomena that create the appearance of distance. His workshop becomes as much laboratory as artist's studio. Tables that should hold palettes and brushes are covered instead with dissected flowers, mechanical devices of his own design, mirrors arranged to study the behavior of reflected light. Apprentices who expect to learn traditional painting techniques find themselves instead assisting with experiments in hydraulic engineering or helping to construct elaborate contraptions for testing theories about the physics of motion. This integration of art and science produces remarkable innovations. Working on a portrait commission, a young musician named Cecilia Gallerani, Leonardo applies his knowledge of anatomy to achieve unprecedented naturalism in the rendering of human flesh. Every subtle gradation of color and tone reflects his understanding of how blood flows beneath the skin, how muscles attach to bones, how light interacts with different types of tissue. But more than technical accuracy, the portrait reveals Leonardo's growing mastery of what he calls the movements of the mind, the ability to capture in paint not just physical appearance, but psychological essence. Cecilia's expression suggests intelligence held in careful reserve, a mind fully engaged, but choosing what to reveal and what to conceal. Her pose, turning slightly away from the viewer while her eyes remain fixed on something beyond the picture frame, creates a sense of living presence that makes previous portraits seem like mere decorative objects. The ermine she holds, symbol of purity and nobility, becomes in Leonardo's hands more than symbolic accessory. The animal's alert expression mirrors that of its mistress, while its sleek form provides a counterpoint to the complex drapery of her sleeve. Every element serves multiple purposes: realistic detail, symbolic meaning, and compositional necessity merge into seamless unity. Florence takes notice. Commissions multiply faster than Leonardo can accept them. Wealthy merchants compete for his services. Religious institutions offer increasingly generous terms for altarpieces. Even foreign rulers send emissaries seeking to lure him away from the city that has nurtured his genius. Among these offers, one stands out for its audacity and scope. Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, proposes not just a single commission, but an entire new life, court artist, engineer, and intellectual companion to one of Italy's most powerful rulers. The position would provide resources for projects on a scale impossible in Florence, opportunities to work with the finest craftsmen and materials available, and, perhaps most appealing, freedom to pursue his scientific investigations without the constant pressure of completing commissioned paintings. The decision weighs heavily on Leonardo's mind as he continues work on his various Florence projects. The city has given him everything he could have hoped for: training under Verrocchio, recognition of his talents, commissions that allow for comfortable living and artistic growth. His friends are here. Lorenzo di Credi, still his closest companion from workshop days; Sandro Botticelli, whose own reputation now rivals Leonardo's; the circle of humanist scholars who gather regularly to discuss art, philosophy, and the exciting possibilities of human knowledge. Yet the limitations are also becoming apparent. Florence's artistic traditions, however brilliant, sometimes constrain as much as they inspire. The guild system that protects artists also restricts their freedom to experiment. Most troubling of all, the small scale of most commissions prevents Leonardo from fully expressing his vision of art as a comprehensive investigation of natural phenomena. Milan offers something different: the chance to work on an epic scale, to create projects that could serve as laboratories for testing his theories about art, science, and their fundamental unity. The Duke has mentioned plans for a bronze horse of unprecedented size, for engineering projects that would reshape the landscape around the city, for court spectacles that would showcase the latest advances in mechanical ingenuity. As autumn arrives and the light in his workshop takes on the golden quality that will always remind him of these Florence years, Leonardo makes his decision. He will accept Sforza's offer, but not as abandonment of everything he has learned and achieved here. Rather, it will be the next stage in a journey that began in the hills of Vinci, continued through Verrocchio's workshop, and now points toward possibilities he can barely imagine. On his last night in the city, He climbs to the roof of his workshop to look out over Florence spread below him in the moonlight. The Arno catches and scatters silver light as it winds through the valley. The great dome of the cathedral rises like a prayer-made stone. In the distance, the hills of his childhood sleep under stars that seem both familiar and strange. The same constellations he watched as a boy, but viewed now through eyes that have learned to see in ways that boy could never have imagined. He carries with him notebooks filled with discoveries, techniques perfected through years of patient work, and a reputation that will open doors throughout Italy and beyond. But more importantly, he carries an understanding of his own mission to push against the boundaries of what art can be and do, to explore the connections between seeing and knowing, creating and understanding. Florence has made him an artist. Milan will give him the chance to become something more, a force of nature disguised as a man, someone who refuses to accept that the world must remain as it has always been. In his luggage are sketches for flying machines, plans for redirecting rivers, designs for weapons and fortifications, and theatrical spectacles that will blur the line between art and magic. The boy from Vinci has become the master of Florence. Soon he will be something else entirely, the Leonardo of Milan, working on a scale and with an ambition that will either establish him as the greatest genius of his age or destroy him in the attempt. Tomorrow's journey will carry him toward both triumph and tragedy, toward achievements that will outlast empires and failures that will haunt him until the end of his days. But tonight he is still poised between what has been accomplished and what remains to be attempted. The notebooks wait beside his traveling chest, ready for new observations, new insights, new dreams that refuse to remain earthbound. The road to Milan unfolds like a promise through the autumn landscape, each mile carrying Leonardo further from the familiar rhythms of Florence toward a destiny he cannot yet fully comprehend. His traveling party is small, a few assistants, several chests of belongings, and the precious cargo of his notebooks. But his mind carries the weight of extraordinary ambitions. In his letter to Ludovico Sforza, he has presented himself not merely as a painter, but as a master of 10 different arts: military engineer, architect, sculptor, musician, and inventor of machines that can reshape the very fabric of reality. It is a bold claim, perhaps audacious to the point of folly. But as his horse picks its way through the mountain passes that separate Tuscany from Lombardy, Leonardo feels the quiet certainty that has guided him since childhood. The boy who once watched birds above the hills of Vinci, who learned to read the secret language of flowing water and growing things, has become something unprecedented. An artist whose canvas is the entire world, whose palette includes not just pigments, but principles that govern everything from the flight of birds to the movement of human hearts. Milan in 1482 presents a spectacle that would have overwhelmed that country boy, but Leonardo absorbs it with the seasoned eye of someone who has learned that every environment contains lessons for those who know how to observe. This is a city built for power rather than beauty, its massive walls and imposing castle speaking of a world where art serves politics and creativity bends to the will of princes. The Sforza court glitters with a brilliance that is both magnificent and precarious, sustained by military might, diplomatic cunning, and the constant need to project an image of invincibility. Ludovico himself, Il Moro, as he is known for his dark complexion and Moorish features, embodies the contradictions of his age. He is a patron of learning who has seized power through treachery, a lover of beauty who rules through fear, a visionary who dreams of transforming Milan into the greatest city in Italy, while constantly looking over his shoulder for the enemies that such ambitions inevitably create. When he receives Leonardo in the great hall of the Castello Sforzesco, surrounded by tapestries and works of art plundered from across Europe, he sees not just an artist, but a weapon, someone whose talents can serve both his cultural pretensions and his practical needs. "They tell me you can make machines of war," Ludovico says without preamble, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Show me." Leonardo produces sketches from his travel portfolio, designs for siege engines, fortifications, even primitive tanks that could, he claims, break through enemy lines while protecting their operators from arrows and spears. The drawings are accompanied by his mirror script, those backwards letters that Ludovico finds both intriguing and slightly unsettling, as if this artist carries secrets that must be protected even from himself. But it is not the military applications that ultimately secure Leonardo's position at court. When he demonstrates a lyre of his own design, an instrument shaped like a horse's head that produces tones of unprecedented richness and clarity, Ludovico recognizes something more valuable than any weapon: the ability to create beauty that can serve the deeper purposes of power. A prince who can command such artistry commands respect not just through fear, but through wonder, and wonder creates a loyalty that no amount of force can purchase. The commission that defines Leonardo's Milan years comes within months of his arrival. Ludovico wants a bronze horse of impossible size, 24 feet tall, weighing 70 tons when complete, to honor his father Francesco and establish the Sforza dynasty's claim to immortality. It is a project that will require everything Leonardo has learned about sculpture, engineering, metallurgy, and the fundamental properties of matter itself. Working in a specially constructed workshop near the castle, Leonardo approaches the great horse with characteristic thoroughness. He dissects equine corpses to understand the precise architecture of muscle and bone that enables these powerful animals to carry riders into battle. He studies classical sculptures, noting how ancient masters solved the problem of representing ideal form while maintaining structural integrity. Most importantly, he develops new techniques for casting bronze on a scale never before attempted. The preparatory work alone takes years. Full-size clay models must be constructed and tested, foundry techniques perfected through countless small experiments, mathematical calculations checked and rechecked to ensure that the finished sculpture will not collapse under its own enormous weight. Leonardo's notebooks from this period reveal an obsession with detail that borders on the supernatural. Measurements of horse proportions accurate to fractions of inches, analyses of how bronze behaves at different temperatures, even studies of how the sculpture will appear from various viewing angles under different lighting conditions. But as the great horse takes shape in clay, Leonardo finds himself drawn into other projects that showcase the breadth of his abilities. He designs elaborate court entertainments, mechanical lions that walk across the floor and open their chests to reveal flowers, flying angels suspended by nearly invisible wires, stage sets that transform through hidden machinery from earthly gardens into celestial visions. These spectacles serve Ludovico's political purposes by demonstrating the sophistication of his court, but they also provide Leonardo with laboratories for testing theories about mechanics, optics, and human psychology. The notebooks multiply, filled with observations that connect seemingly disparate phenomena. Why do certain color combinations produce feelings of harmony while others create tension? How can mechanical advantage be maximized through the proper arrangement of pulleys and levers? What principles govern the way water flows around obstacles, and how might those same principles be applied to architectural design? It is during these Milan years that Leonardo develops his mature understanding of what he calls the science of painting. The idea that art achieves its greatest power when grounded in deep knowledge of natural phenomena. Every painted shadow must reflect accurate understanding of how light behaves. Every depicted muscle must correspond to anatomical reality. Every landscape must capture the actual forces that shape the Earth's surface. This philosophy finds its fullest expression in the commission that will define his reputation for centuries to come. The Dominican monks of Santa Maria delle Grazie request an image of the Last Supper for their refectory wall, a subject that countless artists have attempted, but one that Leonardo approaches with insights that transform traditional iconography into revolutionary drama. Rather than showing the apostles arranged in neat, symmetrical groups around Christ, Leonardo captures the moment immediately after Jesus announces that one among them will betray him. The words have just been spoken. Their impact is still rippling through the gathering like stones thrown into still water. Each apostle responds according to his character. Peter reaches for his knife in instinctive anger. John leans toward Christ in sorrowful disbelief. Judas recoils as if the words were aimed specifically at him. The composition itself becomes a study in mathematical harmony and psychological truth. The 12 disciples form 4 groups of 3, their positions and gestures creating a visual rhythm that draws the eye inevitably toward Christ at the center. The perspective lines of the painted architecture converge on his head, making him literally the vanishing point towards which all visual elements direct the viewer's attention. But Leonardo's true innovation lies in his treatment of the individual figures. Each face is a portrait, not just of physical appearance, but of moral character revealed under extreme stress. Years of anatomical study inform every detail: the way surprise affects facial muscles, how different personalities express shock through body language, the subtle signs by which inner nature betrays itself under pressure. The painting technique itself reflects Leonardo's refusal to accept traditional limitations. Instead of the usual fresco method, which requires rapid work while plaster remains wet, he develops an experimental approach that allows for the careful building up of colors and the subtle transitions between light and shadow that he believes necessary for psychological truth. The process is painstakingly slow, but the results achieve a lifelike quality that makes viewers feel they are witnessing the actual historical moment. Yet even as he creates what will be recognized as one of the greatest masterpieces in the history of art, Leonardo cannot resist the pull of his other interests. he disappears for days to study the flow of water in Milan's canal system, seeking to understand principles that might be applied to hydraulic engineering projects. He dissects corpses in the hospital of Santa Maria delle Grazie, pursuing anatomical investigations that have nothing to do with painting, but everything to do with his insatiable curiosity about the mechanisms of life. These distractions frustrate the monks, who want their mural completed according to schedule. They complain to Ludovico, who summons Leonardo to explain his methods. The artist's response reveals the intensity of his approach to creative work. The works of genius, he explains, sometimes accomplish more when they work less, seeking out inventions with the mind and forming those perfect ideas which the hands afterwards express and reproduce from the images already conceived in the brain. It is a defense of contemplative creativity that challenges the era's assumptions about artistic labor. Leonardo argues that the most important work happens not when brush meets wall, but when mind engages with the fundamental problems that each genuine artwork presents. The Last Supper succeeds not because he painted it quickly, but because he thought about it deeply enough to discover truths that had eluded every previous artist who attempted the subject. The mural, when finally complete around 1498, represents the culmination of everything Leonardo has learned about art, science, and human nature during his 16 years in Milan. Visitors come from across Europe to see it, recognizing immediately that they are in the presence of something unprecedented. The painting functions simultaneously as religious art, psychological study, and technical demonstration, proof that the artificial boundaries between different types of knowledge are exactly that, artificial. But even as Leonardo reaches the heights of artistic achievement, the political foundation that has supported his work begins to crumble. Ludovico's ambitions have made enemies throughout Italy and beyond. French armies mass on the borders of Lombardy, their commanders carrying claims to Milan that date back generations. The bronze that was intended for the great horse has been melted down for cannons. The massive clay model stands abandoned in its workshop, and the court that once glittered with confident power now huddles in increasingly desperate schemes for survival. Leonardo watches these developments with the detached interest of someone whose true loyalty is to knowledge rather than politics. He has served Ludovico faithfully, creating works of beauty and ingenuity that have enhanced the Duke's reputation throughout Europe. But he recognizes that his patron's downfall is inevitable, and he begins to make preparations for yet another transformation of his life and career. In his notebooks, between sketches of canal systems and studies of facial expressions, he writes with characteristic precision. The life of a court artist is like that of a river. It must always be moving, always adapting to new channels, or it stagnates and dies. The river of his genius has flowed through Florence, where it learned its course, and through Milan, where it deepened and gained power. Soon it will be forced to find new channels, carrying with it everything learned during these extraordinary years when art and science danced together in the service of impossible dreams. The great horse will never be cast in bronze, but the principles Leonardo discovered in attempting it will influence architects and engineers for centuries to come. The Last Supper would begin to deteriorate almost immediately due to his experimental techniques, but its innovations in composition and psychological portraiture will reshape the very definition of religious art. As 1499 draws to a close and French armies approach the gates of Milan, Leonardo stands once again at the threshold between one life and the next. The genius of Florence has become the master of Milan. Now he must discover what other transformations await in a world where old certainties crumble and new possibilities emerge from the ruins of failed ambitions. In the cold hours before dawn, when Milan sleeps under winter stars and even the castle guards huddle close to their braziers, Leonardo makes his way through empty streets towards the hospital of Santa Maria delle Grazie. His footsteps echo softly against wet cobblestones as he carries his leather satchel of instruments, scalpels honed to surgical sharpness, probes delicate as silversmith's tools, measuring devices of his own design that can capture proportions to the finest degree. He is 47 years old, at the peak of his intellectual powers, and he is about to embark on explorations that will carry him deeper into the mysteries of life than any artist has ever ventured. In the basement morgue of the hospital, by the light of oil lamps that cast wavering shadows on stone walls, he will perform dissections that transform death into revelation, cutting through layers of flesh and bone to discover the hidden architecture that enables consciousness, emotion, and the miracle of human existence itself. The corpse before him this morning was, until yesterday, an old man who died peacefully in his sleep, one of the fortunate ones who slip away without violence or prolonged suffering. Leonardo has obtained permission from the hospital authorities to examine the body, ostensibly to improve his artistic representation of the human form. But as he arranges his instruments and positions the oil lamps for optimal illumination, his purposes extend far beyond the needs of painting. With the first careful incision, he enters a world that few of his contemporaries can even imagine. The skin parts cleanly under his blade, revealing the yellow fat beneath, then the red complexity of muscle tissue, each fiber arranged with a precision that speaks of divine engineering. But Leonardo approaches these wonders without the reverence that paralyzes lesser minds. His eyes are those of an investigator, someone who believes that understanding serves truth better than worship, that the Creator is best honored through careful study of creation's mechanisms. His notebooks record each discovery with the methodical precision of a natural philosopher. The human heart, which poets describe as the seat of emotion, reveals itself under his examination to be a pump of extraordinary sophistication. 4 chambers working in perfect coordination, valves opening and closing with each beat to ensure that blood flows in only one direction. He traces the coronary arteries that feed the heart muscle itself, noting how their branching pattern resembles the structure of river systems, as if the same geometric principles that shape landscapes also govern the distribution of life-giving fluids through the human body. This connection between microcosm and macrocosm fascinates him. The networks of blood vessels he uncovers in human bodies mirror the waterways he has studied in the valleys of Tuscany and Lombardy. The branching of bronchi in the lungs follows the same mathematical laws that determine how trees spread their limbs toward light. Even the structure of bones, hollow where strength is needed without weight, dense where maximum durability is required, echoes the engineering principles he has observed in bird skeletons and architectural supports. But it is the nervous system that truly captures his imagination. Following delicate, white threads from the brain down through the spinal cord and out to the furthest extremities, Leonardo begins to map the pathways through which sensation travels from fingertips to consciousness, through which will translates into movement. He dissects the eye with particular care, recognizing it as the organ through which his own understanding of the world has been largely constructed. The eye, he discovers, is an instrument of almost unimaginable complexity. The clear lens focuses light with mathematical precision onto the retina, where millions of nerve endings convert optical information into signals the brain can interpret. He studies the muscles that control the iris, dilating and contracting the pupil to regulate the amount of light entering the eye. Most remarkably, he identifies the blind spot where the optic nerve connects to the retina, using ingenious experiments to demonstrate how the brain compensates for this gap in visual information. These investigations inform his painting in ways that go far beyond simple anatomical accuracy. Understanding how the eye actually works allows him to manipulate visual perception with unprecedented subtlety. He knows now why certain color combinations create the illusion of depth, why objects appear to change color as they recede into the distance, why the edges of forms seem to soften when viewed through atmospheric haze. The knowledge transforms his artistic practice. Working on portraits during this period, he applies his understanding of how facial muscles attach to bone structure, how expressions form through the complex interaction of dozens of tiny movements, how the play of light across curved surfaces can suggest the presence of consciousness beneath the skin. Each face becomes not just a likeness, but a demonstration of the principles that govern human appearance and expression. His anatomical drawings from these years represent a revolution in medical illustration. Previous artists had depicted the human body in stylized, often inaccurate ways, more concerned with symbolic meaning than biological truth. Leonardo's drawings combine scientific precision with aesthetic power, showing anatomical structures with a clarity and beauty that makes them accessible to both physicians and artists. He develops new techniques for representing three-dimensional forms on flat surfaces, cross-sections that reveal internal structure, exploded views that show how different systems relate to each other, sequential drawings that capture the body from multiple angles. His famous drawing of the Vitruvian Man, showing human proportions inscribed within both circle and square, becomes a visual demonstration of the mathematical harmonies that underlie biological forms. But perhaps his most profound discovery emerges from his study of the brain itself. Carefully removing the top of the skull and peeling back the protective membranes, he encounters the gray matter, where, he believes, all human thoughts and memories reside. He injects wax into the brain's ventricles to create casts of these spaces, trying to understand how the flow of cerebrospinal fluid might relate to mental processes. The implications overwhelm him. If consciousness emerges from purely physical processes, if thoughts are products of brain activity rather than emanations of an immortal soul, then human beings are both more wonderful and more terrible than traditional philosophy suggests. More wonderful because the complexity required to produce self-awareness from mere matter exceeds anything previously imagined. More terrible because it implies that death truly ends individual existence, that consciousness is as mortal as the flesh that houses it. These insights place Leonardo in dangerous intellectual territory. The Church teaches that souls are immortal, that human consciousness transcends material existence. His anatomical investigations suggest otherwise, or at least raise questions that orthodox theology cannot easily answer. He records his observations carefully, but shares them cautiously, understanding that some truths are too revolutionary for their time. The practical applications of his anatomical knowledge extend beyond art into engineering and medicine. Understanding how muscles work as systems of levers and pulleys informs his designs for mechanical devices. His studies of bone structure influence his architectural projects, showing him how to create buildings that are both strong and elegant. Most remarkably, he begins to envision medical procedures that will not be successfully performed for centuries. Heart surgery, cataract removal, even primitive forms of organ transplantation. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind grappling with the deepest questions of existence. What is the relationship between mind and body? How does consciousness emerge from unconscious matter? Why do some individuals live to great age while others die young, despite appearing equally healthy? He conducts what may be history's first systematic study of aging, comparing the organs of centenarians with those of children to understand how time changes the body's internal architecture. The work takes its toll. Spending hours in cold, poorly ventilated morgues exposes him to diseases that claim many of his contemporaries. The psychological impact is equally challenging. Confronting mortality night after night, seeing the human body reduced to component parts, witnessing how quickly life's complexity dissolves into simple chemistry. Yet he persists, driven by curiosity that outweighs both physical discomfort and existential dread. His anatomical studies also deepen his understanding of his own artistic limitations. The more he learns about the mechanisms of life, the more he realizes how much escapes even the most skillful representation. How can paint on canvas capture the actual texture of living flesh, the subtle warmth that distinguishes life from death, the mysterious quality that makes a face more than just an arrangement of features? This recognition leads to new artistic techniques, the sfumato for which he becomes famous, that almost imperceptible gradation between light and shadow that suggests forms emerging from or dissolving back into mystery. His later portraits achieve an uncanny, lifelike quality, not through photographic precision, but through understanding of what the eye sees and how the mind interprets visual information. The invasion of Milan by French forces in 1499 interrupts this phase of Leonardo's career, but cannot halt his investigations. He packs his anatomical notes carefully among his most precious possessions, knowing that the insights recorded in these pages represent years of work that cannot be repeated. As he prepares to leave the city where he has achieved his greatest artistic triumphs and his deepest scientific discoveries, he understands that his anatomical investigations have changed him fundamentally. He is no longer simply an artist who uses scientific knowledge to improve his paintings. He has become something unprecedented, a natural philosopher who happens to express his insights through art, a researcher whose laboratory includes not just the human body, but the entire natural world. The boundary between art and science, which seemed so clear when he first arrived in Florence as Verrocchio's apprentice, has dissolved completely. Standing in his workshop for the last time, surrounded by anatomical drawings that reveal secrets hidden since the creation of the world, Leonardo recognizes that his dissections have taught him more than just how bodies work. They have shown him how to look beneath surfaces, how to find the principles that connect all phenomena, how to read the book of nature in a language that transcends the limitations of any single discipline. The knowledge will travel with him into exile, informing everything he creates in the wandering years ahead. Each painting will reflect understanding earned through cutting into death to discover the sources of life. Each mechanical invention will apply principles derived from studying the most sophisticated machines ever created, the human bodies that house consciousness, emotion, and the mysterious capacity to wonder about one's own existence. As dawn breaks over Milan and Leonardo begins his journey toward an uncertain future, he carries in his mind images that will never fade. The intricate beauty of a dissected heart, the delicate architecture of the human eye, the profound mystery of grey matter that somehow generates the thoughts he is thinking at this very moment. He has looked into the deepest secrets of his own nature, and that knowledge will shape everything he creates for the rest of his extraordinary life. The year 1500 finds Leonardo neither in Milan nor Florence, but suspended between worlds, carrying his accumulated knowledge like a merchant with precious cargo seeking the right market. At 48, he has become something unprecedented in human history, a mind that refuses to acknowledge boundaries between different types of understanding. Someone who approaches painting and engineering, anatomy and music, philosophy and mathematics as facets of a single, unified investigation into the nature of reality itself. He travels light, a few assistants, several chests of notebooks, and the portable laboratory of instruments that has become as essential to him as brushes once were to other painters. But the true weight of his baggage is intellectual. Thousands of observations about how water flows and birds fly, how muscles move and light behaves, how human faces reveal the movements of souls, and how mechanical principles govern everything from the rotation of planets to the beating of hearts. This is the Renaissance in human form, the rebirth of learning that has swept across Italy, dissolving the rigid categories that medieval thinking imposed on knowledge. But where others see the revival of ancient wisdom, Leonardo sees something more radical. The possibility that human beings can understand the fundamental principles underlying all phenomena, that the same mind capable of creating beauty can also unlock the secrets of creation itself. Venice offers temporary refuge, its merchant princes eager to employ his military engineering skills against the Ottoman threat. Leonardo walks the canals with the eye of someone who has studied hydraulic principles in a dozen different contexts, noting how the city's survival depends on an intricate dance between human ingenuity and natural forces. The tide that brings prosperity also threatens destruction, The same waters that carry trade goods could, if improperly managed, drown the civilization they have helped create. He designs fortifications for the Venetian lagoon that demonstrate his mature understanding of defensive architecture. These are not simple walls, but complex systems that channel attacking forces into predetermined patterns, using the enemy's own momentum against them. The drawings reveal how years of anatomical study have informed his military engineering. He understands that cities, like bodies, are vulnerable at certain points and must be protected through strategic positioning of defenses. But even as he serves Venice's immediate needs, Leonardo's mind ranges far beyond the requirements of any single commission. His notebooks from this period reveal investigations that span disciplines that will not be formally recognized for centuries. He studies the formation of clouds and the causes of rainfall, developing theories about meteorology that anticipate modern understanding of atmospheric physics. He investigates the properties of different metals, conducting experiments in metallurgy that inform both his sculptural projects and his mechanical inventions. Most remarkably, he begins to understand time itself as a force that shapes all natural phenomena. His geological observations, how rivers carve valleys, how mountains rise and erode, how fossils found on hilltops prove that seas once covered the land, lead him to conclusions that challenge biblical chronology. The earth, he realizes, is far older than Scripture suggests, shaped by processes that operate over timescales that dwarf human history. These insights place him in dangerous intellectual territory, but Leonardo navigates such risks with characteristic subtlety. He records his observations in his private notebooks, written in mirror script that protects controversial ideas from casual discovery. When he speaks publicly about his theories, he frames them as speculations about artistic representation rather than challenges to religious doctrine. How should a painter depict ancient landscapes? What techniques best capture the appearance of weathered stone? The questions seem innocent enough to avoid theological controversy while allowing him to explore radical ideas. Florence, when he returns in 1503, greets him as a returning master whose reputation has only grown during his absence. The city has changed. New political arrangements, different patrons in power, fresh artistic movements emerging from workshops he once knew as struggling enterprises. But the essential character remains the same. A place where beauty and intellect dance together in constantly evolving patterns, where competition drives innovation and innovation creates beauty that enriches human existence. The commission that defines this mature phase of his career comes from the new government of the Florentine Republic. They want a battle scene, the Battle of Anghiari, painted on the wall of the council chamber, showing Florentine forces defeating Milanese troops. It should be a straightforward project, heroic figures in dramatic action, horses plunging into combat, the chaos and glory of warfare rendered with maximum visual impact. But Leonardo, as those who know him have learned to expect, transforms the assignment into something far more complex. His preliminary drawings show not glorified violence, but war revealed in all its horror and magnificence. Horses and men become a single organism, driven by terror and aggression, faces contorted by emotions that transcend individual identity to express universal truths about human nature under extreme stress. The central group, 4 horsemen fighting for possession of a battle standard, becomes a study in the dynamics of conflict. Every muscle is tensioned for maximum effort. Every expression reveals character under ultimate pressure. Every detail serves both artistic and scientific purposes. Leonardo uses his anatomical knowledge to show exactly how bodies move in combat, his understanding of animal behavior to capture the way horses respond to the chaos of battle, his insights into human psychology to reveal how warfare strips away civilization to expose the primitive drives beneath. Working on the cartoon for the battle scene, Leonardo develops new techniques for representing movement and emotion that will influence artists for centuries. His method of building up forms through countless small strokes creates surfaces that seem to pulse with life. His use of chiaroscuro, the interplay of light and shadow, gives weight and volume to forms while suggesting the moral complexity of human action. But even as he works on this masterpiece, Leonardo finds himself drawn into other projects that reflect the breadth of his mature understanding. He designs canal systems that could transform the landscape of Tuscany, redirecting rivers to create new trade routes while preventing the floods that regularly devastate agricultural regions. He studies the flight of birds with renewed intensity, convinced that human flight is not only possible, but inevitable. A question of understanding principles rather than accepting limitations. His notebooks fill with observations that connect phenomena across vast scales of space and time. The spiral pattern of water flowing down a drain mirrors the arrangement of hair on a human head, which echoes the form of certain seashells, which reflects the motion of planets through the heavens. Everything connects to everything else in ways that suggest underlying mathematical harmonies governing all existence. These insights inform his painting in ways that transcend technique to touch the deepest purposes of art. When he works on portraits during this period, he is not simply recording physical appearance, but investigating the relationship between outer form and inner nature, between the individual face and universal principles of beauty and meaning. Each brushstroke becomes a hypothesis about how consciousness manifests itself through matter, how divine intelligence expresses itself through natural forms. The most famous result of this approach begins around 1503, the portrait of Lisa Gherardini, wife of a Florentine silk merchant known to history as the Mona Lisa. On the surface, it seems an unremarkable commission, a prosperous middle-class woman wanting her portrait painted by the city's most celebrated artist. But in Leonardo's hands, the project becomes an investigation into the deepest mysteries of human existence. He works on the painting with unprecedented care, building up layers of transparent glazes that create effects no previous artist has achieved. The flesh seems to glow from within, as if illuminated by some internal light source. The famous smile appears and disappears, depending on where the viewer focuses their attention, an optical effect that Leonardo creates through his understanding of how peripheral vision differs from direct sight. But the technical innovations serve a larger purpose. Leonardo is attempting something that has never been tried, to capture not just physical appearance, but the essence of consciousness itself, to show what it looks like when a mind inhabits a body, when spirit animates matter. The landscape behind the figure, with its winding rivers and distant mountains, represents not just a background, but a visual metaphor for the relationship between human consciousness and the natural world from which it emerges. Working on the portrait obsessively, returning to it again and again over years, Leonardo demonstrates how his mature understanding transforms even traditional artistic tasks into philosophical investigations. Every subtle gradation of color and tone reflects knowledge gained through anatomical dissection, geological observation, optical experiment, and psychological insight. The painting becomes a synthesis of everything he has learned about the nature of reality. Yet even as he creates what will become the world's most famous painting, Leonardo remains frustrated by the limitations of his medium. How can mere pigments capture the actual warmth of living flesh, the subtle movements that reveal thought, the mysterious quality that distinguishes consciousness from unconsciousness? His notebooks record experiments with new painting techniques, attempts to develop media that could more closely approximate the effects he observes in nature. This frustration drives him toward increasingly ambitious projects. He designs theatrical productions that blur the boundary between art and engineering, creating spectacles in which mechanical devices produce effects that seem magical to audiences. He works on architectural projects that demonstrate how buildings can be designed to enhance human well-being through careful attention to light, air circulation, and acoustic properties. Most significantly, he begins to envision technologies that could transform human existence itself. His notebooks contain designs for submarines that could allow exploration of ocean depths, flying machines that would make the Earth's surface as accessible as a painter's canvas, optical devices that could reveal previously invisible phenomena. These are not fantasies, but systematic explorations of possibility, grounded in careful observation of natural principles. By 1505, Leonardo has become something unique in human history, a complete Renaissance man whose investigations span every domain of human knowledge while remaining unified by a single vision of understanding. He is simultaneously the greatest artist of his age and its most innovative scientist, its most practical engineer, and its most visionary philosopher. In him, the Renaissance ideal of universal learning achieves its perfect expression. But perfection contains the seeds of its own dissolution. The very breadth of Leonardo's interests begins to work against the completion of individual projects. Why finish a single painting when there are so many other questions to investigate? Why limit himself to one medium when the entire world offers itself as material for exploration? His contemporaries begin to whisper about projects left incomplete, commissions abandoned, promises unfulfilled. The man who has achieved the Renaissance dream of universal knowledge is about to discover its hidden cost, the impossibility of expressing infinite understanding through finite works, the tragedy of a mind too large for any single lifetime to contain. Standing at the peak of his intellectual powers, master of more domains of knowledge than any individual before or since, Leonardo is poised on the edge of a transformation that will carry him from triumph toward something more complex. The melancholy wisdom of someone who has seen too much, understood too deeply, and discovered that even genius has limits that cannot be transcended. In the small workshop behind the church of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Florence, time seems to move differently. The afternoon light slants through tall windows, illuminating particles of dust that drift like suspended thoughts through the air. At his easel, Leonardo works with the patience of someone who has learned that certain truths cannot be hurried, that the deepest mysteries reveal themselves only to those willing to wait, to observe, to approach each brushstroke as both question and answer. Before him sits the portrait that will outlive empires, Lisa Gherardini, wife of Francesco del Giocondo, her hands folded, her gaze directed toward something just beyond the viewer's shoulder. To most observers, she appears to be a prosperous merchant's wife sitting for her portrait, a conventional commission that any competent artist might complete in a few months. But Leonardo sees something else entirely, an opportunity to capture the very essence of what it means to be consciously alive, to translate the mystery of consciousness into visible form. He has been working on this painting for 3 years now, building up layer upon layer of transparent glazes, each one so thin that dozens are required to achieve the effects he envisions. The technique demands extraordinary patience, both from the artist and his subject, but it produces results impossible to achieve through any other method. The flesh seems to glow from within, as if illuminated by some internal light source. The features emerge from shadow and dissolve back into mystery with transitions so subtle they seem to breathe. But technical innovation serves a deeper purpose. Leonardo is attempting something that has never been tried, to paint not just physical appearance, but the phenomenon of awareness itself, to show what it looks like when mind inhabits matter, when divine consciousness expresses itself through human form. Every detail, from the positioning of the hands to the treatment of the landscape background, serves this overarching vision. The hands themselves are masterworks of anatomical understanding and psychological insight. Leonardo has dissected enough corpses to know precisely how tendons connect to bones, how muscles create the subtle modeling that distinguishes living flesh from marble sculpture. But these hands do more than demonstrate technical skill. They reveal character through gesture, suggesting a mind that is both contemplative and decisive, gentle yet strong. The landscape behind the figure represents years of geological observation transformed into poetic vision. The winding rivers that flow toward distant mountains follow paths that Leonardo understands from his engineering studies, while the atmospheric effects that soften distant forms reflect his research into optics and the behavior of light. But more than scientific accuracy, the landscape suggests the relationship between human consciousness and the natural world from which it emerges, individual awareness as part of larger patterns that connect all phenomena. Most mysteriously, there is the smile. Countless viewers have attempted to decode its meaning, to understand what emotion or thought it represents. But Leonardo's achievement lies not in depicting a specific expression, but in creating an effect that changes depending on how it is observed. Look directly at the mouth, and the smile seems to disappear. View it peripherally, and it returns. This optical phenomenon results from his understanding of how different parts of the human eye respond to various types of visual information, a scientific insight transformed into artistic poetry. Working on the portrait becomes a form of meditation for Leonardo, a daily practice that connects him to truths that cannot be expressed through any other medium. Each session at the easel teaches him something new about the relationship between seeing and understanding, between technical skill and spiritual insight. The painting grows slowly, organically, as if developing according to its own internal logic rather than following any predetermined plan. His notebooks from this period record observations that reveal how deeply the portrait project affects his thinking about art, science, and human nature. The painter, he writes, competes with nature not to copy its surfaces, but to understand its principles. Every shadow must be justified by accurate knowledge of how light behaves. Every color must reflect understanding of how pigments interact. Every line must serve both aesthetic and anatomical truth. This philosophy transforms his approach to all artistic work. When the French governor of Milan commissions him to paint St. John the Baptist, Leonardo creates a figure that seems to emerge from darkness, like consciousness awakening to self-awareness. The saint's enigmatic expression suggests knowledge that transcends ordinary understanding, while his gesture, pointing upward toward heaven, becomes both religious symbol and philosophical statement about the relationship between earthly and divine reality. The technical methods Leonardo develops for these late works represent the culmination of decades of experimentation. His sfumato technique, the almost imperceptible gradation between light and shadow, achieves effects that seem to bypass normal vision to speak directly to the viewer's consciousness. Forms emerge from and dissolve back into mystery with transitions so subtle they suggest the process of thought itself becoming visible. But perhaps his most revolutionary innovation lies in his understanding of time as an element in painting. Traditional portraits capture their subjects at specific moments, freezing expression and gesture in ways that can seem artificial or theatrical. Leonardo's late works exist in a different temporal dimension, showing figures that seem to have been thinking for centuries and might continue thinking for centuries more. They possess what he calls eternal presence, the quality of existing outside normal time while remaining fully alive and immediate. This temporal dimension becomes most apparent in his final religious works. The Saint Anne with the Virgin and Child, begun during these same years, shows 3 generations of holy figures arranged in a composition that suggests both specific narrative, moment, and timeless archetype. Saint Anne, the Virgin Mary, and the Christ Child interact in ways that seem simultaneously maternal, mystical, and eternal, as if Leonardo has captured not just their physical appearance, but their significance across all of Christian history. The painting demonstrates how his mature understanding integrates multiple levels of meaning within single works. The geological accuracy of the landscape background reflects his studies of mountain formation and erosion. The botanical precision of the plants shows his knowledge of how different species adapt to their environments. The anatomical correctness of the figures reveals his years of dissection and observation. Yet these scientific elements serve spiritual purposes, creating a vision of divine presence manifesting through natural forms. Working on these paintings, Leonardo begins to understand art's unique capacity to transcend the limitations that constrain other forms of human expression. Philosophy can describe truth, but cannot make it visible. Science can discover principles, but cannot embody them in forms that speak to human emotions. Religion can assert meaning, but cannot demonstrate how that meaning manifests in observable phenomena. Only painting informed by deep understanding of natural principles, can synthesize all these approaches into unified statements that address both intellect and imagination. This recognition leads to what may be his most profound insight about the nature of artistic creation. In his notebooks, between sketches of water flow and studies of plant growth, he writes, "The painter's mind becomes transformed into a likeness of the divine mind, for with free power it reasons concerning the generation of diverse natures of animals, plants, fruits, landscapes, fields, ruins, mountains, springs, rivers, and their adornments." It is a claim that would have seemed blasphemous in earlier centuries, but the Renaissance has created space for such audacious thinking. Leonardo suggests that artistic creation, when grounded in deep understanding of natural phenomena, participates in the same creative processes that brought the universe into existence. The painter who truly understands how light behaves, how water flows, how consciousness manifests through matter, becomes a collaborator with divine creativity rather than merely its imitator. This philosophy explains why his late paintings possess such extraordinary power to move viewers across cultural and temporal boundaries. They succeed not simply because they are technically accomplished, though their technical innovations remain unsurpassed, but because they embody universal principles that connect individual human experience to larger patterns of meaning and beauty. Yet even as Leonardo creates works that will outlive civilizations, he becomes increasingly aware of art's limitations. How can mere pigments capture the actual warmth of living flesh, the subtle movements that reveal thought, the mysterious quality that distinguishes consciousness from unconsciousness? His experiments with new painting techniques become more desperate, driven by frustration with media that seem inadequate to express his expanding vision. The Battle of Anghiari, his ambitious mural for the Florentine council chamber, falls victim to these experimental ambitions. Attempting to develop oil-based techniques that would allow for more subtle effects than traditional fresco methods, Leonardo creates a painting of extraordinary power, but one that begins deteriorating almost immediately due to the experimental media. Within years, the masterpiece that should have established his reputation as the greatest painter of his generation becomes a ruin, its surfaces cracking and colors fading as the untested materials fail under environmental stress. The failure haunts him, not just as an artistic disappointment, but as proof of the gap between vision and realization that torments all creative work. In his notebooks, he records his frustration. "O speculator of this machine of ours, do not be sad that you impart knowledge of it through another's death, but rejoice that our Creator has set the intellect to such an excellent instrument." The cryptic passage suggests his growing recognition that individual artistic achievement, however great, remains limited by the mortality of its creator. His paintings will endure longer than his body, but even they are subject to the decay that ultimately claims all material things. Only the principles he has discovered, the insights about light and shadow, form and meaning, consciousness and representation, have any claim to permanence. Standing in his workshop as afternoon light fades toward evening, surrounded by paintings that seem to breathe with life, yet remain forever silent, Leonardo experiences the melancholy wisdom of someone who has achieved more than any artist before him, while recognizing how much remains forever beyond achievement. The Mona Lisa regards him with that enigmatic expression that has consumed 3 years of his life, beautiful beyond description, yet still falling short of the living presence that inspired it. Outside his windows, Florence prepares for evening. Merchants closing their shops, artists cleaning their brushes, scholars returning to their libraries with questions that may never find answers. The city that nurtured his genius continues its ancient rhythms, largely unaware that in this small workshop someone has pushed the boundaries of human expression further than they have ever been extended. But Leonardo knows. In the gathering dusk, illuminated by candles that cast wavering shadows on walls covered with studies and sketches, he understands that he has become something unprecedented. A painter of the eternal, someone whose works transcend their historical moment to speak directly to truths that connect all human experience across time and space. It is an achievement that brings both profound satisfaction and equally profound loneliness. The isolation of someone who has seen too clearly, understood too deeply, and discovered that even the greatest art cannot fully bridge the gap between vision and reality. The commission arrives with the weight of destiny behind it. Florence, flush with republican pride and desperate to assert its cultural supremacy over Rome and Venice, has decided to transform the great hall of the Palazzo Vecchio into a showcase of artistic achievement that will proclaim the city's greatness to all of Italy. 2 walls will receive monumental battle scenes painted by the greatest masters of the age. Leonardo will depict the Battle of Anghiari on one wall. On the opposite wall, Michelangelo Buonarroti will paint the Battle of Cassina. It is 1504, and the very air of Florence crackles with anticipation. Never before have 2 such talents been set in direct competition, their works facing each other across the same room like gladiators in an arena of paint and plaster. The entire artistic world watches, understanding that something unprecedented is about to unfold. A contest that will determine not just which man is the superior artist, but what direction art itself will take in the new century. Leonardo, now 52, approaches the commission with the accumulated wisdom of 3 decades at the pinnacle of artistic achievement. He has painted angels that seem to breathe, portraits that capture the mystery of consciousness itself, scientific diagrams that unlock the secrets of nature. His reputation extends far beyond Italy. French kings compete for his services, scholars across Europe study his innovations, and younger artists pilgrimage to Florence, hoping to glimpse the master at work. But success has brought its own burdens. Leonardo's notebooks record his growing frustration with the limitations of his medium, his impatience with patrons who care more about completion schedules than artistic truth, his sense that he has pushed painting as far as it can go without breakthrough innovations that seem increasingly beyond reach. The man who once approached each new project with boundless enthusiasm now works with the melancholy wisdom of someone who has achieved everything possible within existing boundaries. Michelangelo represents something different, raw talent shaped by different influences, a vision of art that emphasizes sculptural power over Leonardo's subtle psychological insights. 29 years old, he has already carved the David that stands guard over the Palazzo Vecchio, its massive form proclaiming a new aesthetic that celebrates human strength and divine fury rather than intellectual complexity. Where Leonardo seeks to understand through careful observation, Michelangelo seems to create through sheer force of will, imposing his vision on marble and pigment with an intensity that leaves observers stunned. The younger man makes no secret of his contempt for Leonardo's approach to art. "Your bronze horse was never cast," he sneers during one of their few public encounters, referring to the great equestrian monument that French armies destroyed when they conquered Milan. The insult cuts deep, not just because it recalls a painful failure, but because it represents a fundamental challenge to Leonardo's entire philosophy of artistic creation. Michelangelo suggests that art succeeds through completion, not conception, that unrealized masterpieces, however brilliant, count for nothing against finished works that stand before the public eye. Leonardo responds with characteristic subtlety, but his notebooks reveal the wound the comment inflicts. "Small minds attack what they cannot understand," he writes, but the words carry the defensive tone of someone whose confidence has been shaken. For the first time since his youth in Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo finds himself forced to justify not just his methods, but his very approach to creative work. The Battle of Anghiari becomes his answer, an attempt to prove that his integration of art and science produces results beyond anything achievable through pure inspiration. Working on the cartoon, he applies everything learned during decades of anatomical study, optical research, and mechanical observation. The central group of horsemen fighting for possession of a battle standard becomes a study in the dynamics of conflict that reveals universal truths about human nature under extreme stress. His preparatory drawings show warriors and horses fused into a single organism, driven by terror and aggression. Faces contort with emotions that transcend individual identity to express archetypal truths about courage and cowardice, loyalty and betrayal, the thin line that separates civilization from barbarism. Every muscle tension reflects anatomical accuracy. Every expression demonstrates psychological insight. Every detail serves both artistic and scientific purposes. But Michelangelo's cartoon for the Battle of Cassina reveals a different kind of genius, one that bypasses careful observation to achieve direct emotional impact. His figures possess a sculptural monumentality that makes Leonardo's psychological subtlety seem almost effeminate by comparison. Where Leonardo shows the horror of warfare, Michelangelo celebrates its heroic potential. His soldiers are gods temporarily inhabiting human forms, their nude bodies revealing divine geometry rather than mortal vulnerability. The contrast becomes a public spectacle. Artists, scholars, and curious citizens flock to see both cartoons as they develop, comparing approaches and debating merits with the passionate intensity that only Florentines can bring to aesthetic questions. The competition transforms from private artistic challenge into cultural phenomenon, with supporters of each master forming factions that argue in taverns and workshops throughout the city. Yet as the months pass and work progresses on both projects, subtle changes begin to appear in Leonardo's approach. The influence of Michelangelo's powerful figural style becomes apparent in drawings where anatomical accuracy gives way to more sculptural treatment of form. For the first time in his career, Leonardo seems to be responding to another artist's vision rather than following his own internal compass. This influence disturbs him more than he cares to admit. His entire artistic philosophy has been built on the conviction that truth emerges through careful observation of natural phenomena, that beauty results from understanding rather than pure inspiration. But Michelangelo's cartoon demonstrates that art can achieve profound impact through approaches that seem to bypass such methodical investigation. Perhaps there are truths that can only be captured through intuitive leaps rather than systematic analysis. The crisis deepens when both artists begin transferring their cartoons to the walls. Leonardo experiments with oil-based techniques that should allow for the subtle gradations impossible in traditional fresco work. But the experimental medium fails catastrophically. Within months, the painted surface begins cracking and fading as the untested materials react poorly to Florence's humid climate. Years of preparation result in a ruined masterpiece that becomes a symbol of over-ambitious innovation. Michelangelo, meanwhile, receives the commission that will define his career: the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Pope Julius II summons him away from Florence before his battle scene can be completed, but the cartoon's influence spreads throughout the artistic community. Young painters study its powerful figural style, adopting techniques that emphasize sculptural form over Leonardo's atmospheric effects. The double abandonment, Leonardo's technical failure, Michelangelo's departure, leaves Florence with two unfinished masterpieces where it had expected twin monuments to artistic achievement. But the competition's real impact lies not in these incomplete works, but in the artistic revolution it has triggered. The younger generation of painters now sees two distinct paths forward: Leonardo's integration of art and science, and Michelangelo's emphasis on pure visual power. Into this volatile atmosphere steps Raffaello Sanzio. Raphael, a young painter from Urbino, who arrives in Florence with the genius to synthesize both approaches into something entirely new. 21 years old, possessing a natural grace that seems to effortlessly achieve effects that cost his elders years of struggle, Raphael studies both masters with the calculating intelligence of someone who understands that the future belongs to those who can combine their innovations rather than choose between them. Leonardo watches this development with complex emotions. Raphael's early works show clear influence from both the Leonardo school's psychological sophistication and Michelangelo's sculptural monumentality. But the young painter possesses something neither older master has achieved: the ability to make such synthesis appear natural and inevitable rather than forced or artificial. His Madonnas combine Leonardo's sfumato with Michelangelo's powerful figural style, creating images that seem both intellectually profound and immediately accessible. The emergence of this new artistic synthesis forces Leonardo to confront uncomfortable questions about his own legacy. Has his lifelong integration of art and science been merely a transitional phase, preparing the way for others who will achieve more direct and powerful results? are his notebooks full of unfinished investigations and abandoned projects, evidence of genius or proof of scattered attention that prevented completion of truly great works. These doubts multiply as commissions become more difficult to secure. Patrons who once competed for his services now seem hesitant to engage an artist whose experimental methods might result in technical failures. The disaster of the Battle of Anghiari has damaged his reputation for reliability, while Michelangelo's success with the Sistine Chapel ceiling establishes the younger artist as the preferred choice for major projects. Yet even as professional disappointments accumulate, Leonardo continues his investigations with undiminished intensity. If patrons no longer trust him with major painting commissions, he will explore other domains where his unique combination of artistic vision and scientific understanding can find expression. His notebooks fill with designs for architectural projects, engineering solutions, theatrical spectacles that blur the boundaries between art and technology. The rivalry that began as artistic competition has evolved into something more complex, a reflection of the broader transformation occurring within Renaissance culture itself. The early Renaissance ideal of the artist as learned investigator, exemplified by Leonardo's career, gives way to a new model that emphasizes pure creative power over systematic understanding. Michelangelo becomes the prototype for this new conception of artistic genius, the inspired individual whose vision transcends normal human limitations through divine inspiration rather than accumulated knowledge. Standing in his workshop one evening, surrounded by paintings in various states of completion and notebooks filled with investigations that span every domain of human knowledge, Leonardo experiences the peculiar melancholy of someone who has achieved more than anyone before him, while recognizing that his approach may already be obsolete. The shadows cast by candlelight on his unfinished works seem to whisper of time's passage, of the inevitable moment when every reputation must yield to newer visions, when even the greatest achievements become historical curiosities rather than living influences. But in that same moment, he understands something that his younger rivals do not yet comprehend: that true artistic achievement transcends immediate fashion or popular success. The investigations recorded in his notebooks, the techniques developed through decades of patient experimentation, the insights gained through combining artistic vision with scientific understanding. These constitute a legacy that will influence human creativity long after contemporary rivalries are forgotten. The competition with Michelangelo has taught Leonardo that there are many paths to artistic greatness, that his own approach represents only one possibility among others. But it has also confirmed his conviction that art achieves its deepest impact when grounded in comprehensive understanding of the principles that govern natural phenomena. Whatever the future brings, whatever new artistic movements emerge from the ferment of Renaissance creativity, the foundation he has laid will support investigations he cannot even imagine. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new disappointments, perhaps new victories. But tonight, working by candlelight on studies that connect the flight of birds to the flow of water to the expression of human emotion, Leonardo continues the investigation that has defined his entire career. The patient exploration of connections that unite all phenomena in patterns of beauty too complex for any single lifetime to fully comprehend. The road stretches endlessly ahead, winding through landscapes that have become as familiar as the lines on Leonardo's aging hands. At 54, he has become a citizen of no particular place, a wanderer carrying his accumulated knowledge in chests and saddlebags, seeking patrons who understand that genius cannot be rushed and vision cannot be scheduled like the delivery of grain or the completion of routine construction projects. Behind him lies Florence, where the failures of recent years have dimmed his reputation. The Battle of Anghiari remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of experimental techniques, while younger artists like Raphael capture commissions that once would have automatically fallen to him. The city that nurtured his early genius now watches him depart with the polite regret reserved for masters whose time has passed, whose innovations belong to history rather than to the immediate future of artistic development. His travelling party reflects the reduced circumstances of his later years. Gone are the large workshops, the teams of assistants, the elaborate equipment that once accompanied his movements between courts. Now he travels with a handful of loyal followers. Francesco Melzi, a young nobleman who serves as both student and secretary. Odo Salai, still with him after 20 years, despite countless conflicts and reconciliations. A few servants and the essential cargo of his notebooks, those thousands of pages that contain the distilled essence of a lifetime's investigation into the nature of reality itself. The notebooks have become his true homeland. While his physical body wanders from court to court, seeking new patrons and fresh challenges, his intellectual life remains anchored in those pages filled with mirror script, mechanical diagrams, anatomical studies, and observations that connect phenomena across scales from the microscopic to the cosmic. They are his legacy and his burden, proof of achievements that few of his contemporaries can fully comprehend, evidence of investigations that may not find completion within his remaining years. Rome calls to him with the promise of papal patronage and proximity to the greatest artistic projects of the age. Pope Leo X, son of Lorenzo de' Medici and inheritor of his family's appreciation for learning and beauty, has assembled a court that rivals ancient Athens in its concentration of talent. Michelangelo works on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Raphael decorates the papal apartments with frescoes that synthesize classical wisdom and Christian revelation. Bramante redesigns St. Peter's Basilica according to principles that will influence architecture for centuries. Into this constellation of genius, Leonardo arrives like a planet following a different orbit, respected for past achievements, but somehow separate from the main currents of contemporary creativity. The Pope receives him graciously, provides workshops and materials, even assigns him projects that should utilize his unique combination of artistic skill and scientific knowledge. But the commissions feel peripheral to the great enterprises that absorb his younger rivals, and Leonardo senses the subtle condescension of those who view him as a relic of an earlier artistic era. His Roman notebooks record a growing sense of isolation, not from lack of recognition, but from the impossibility of communicating the full scope of his investigations to minds shaped by different concerns. When he attempts to explain his theories about the relationship between microcosm and macrocosm, how the branching patterns of blood vessels mirror the structure of river systems, how the proportions of the human body reflect cosmic harmonies. Even learned scholars respond with polite incomprehension. The gap between his vision and contemporary understanding becomes most apparent in his engineering projects. The Pope assigns him to drain marshlands near Rome using principles of hydraulic engineering, but Leonardo's solutions appear impossibly complex to officials accustomed to straightforward approaches. His designs account for variables that others ignore: seasonal changes in rainfall patterns, the effects of different soil compositions on water absorption, even the influence of vegetation on local climate conditions. "Why must you complicate everything?" asks Cardinal Giuliano de' Medici, the Pope's brother and Leonardo's official patron. "Can you not simply dig canals where water needs to flow?" The question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of Leonardo's approach to any problem. He cannot simply solve isolated technical challenges because he understands that everything connects to everything else, that effective solutions must account for the complex web of relationships that govern natural phenomena. But explaining this philosophy to men focused on immediate, practical results proves increasingly frustrating. His artistic work during the Roman period reflects this sense of disconnection from contemporary concerns. The paintings he begins, studies of John the Baptist, investigations of Leda and the Swan, possess a strange, otherworldly quality that seems to address audiences beyond his immediate time and place. The figures emerge from darkness with expressions that suggest knowledge of secrets unavailable to ordinary observation, gestures that point toward truths that cannot be directly stated. Yet even as his official projects stagnate, Leonardo's private investigations continue with undiminished intensity. His notebooks fill with observations that push beyond the boundaries of contemporary understanding, studies of cloud formation that anticipate meteorological principles, investigations of plant growth that prefigure botanical classification systems, mechanical designs that will not be successfully implemented until the industrial age. The loneliness of advanced thinking weighs heavily on him during these Roman years. Surrounded by artists and scholars who represent the highest intellectual achievement of their age, he nevertheless feels profoundly isolated by the scope of his vision. His insights connect domains that others view as separate. His questions probe foundations that others accept as given. His answers suggest possibilities that others cannot even imagine. This isolation deepens when political changes force him to seek new patronage. The election of Pope Adrian VI, a Flemish reformer with little interest in artistic innovation, signals the end of Rome's golden age of papal patronage. Moreover, the broader political situation in Italy grows increasingly unstable as French and Spanish armies contest control of the peninsula, making court positions precarious for anyone without secure local connections. The invitation from Francis I of France arrives at precisely the moment when Leonardo's options in Italy seem most limited. The young French king, barely 23, but already establishing himself as a patron of Renaissance learning, offers not just employment, but genuine respect for Leonardo's unique combination of artistic and scientific achievements. More importantly, Francis promises something that Italian patrons have failed to provide: freedom to pursue his investigations without constant pressure to produce immediately marketable results. The decision to leave Italy proves more difficult than Leonardo anticipated. This is the country where he has spent his entire adult life, where every landscape carries memories of discoveries and achievements, where the very light seems calibrated to his painter's eye. The hills of Tuscany, the canals of Milan, the ancient streets of Rome, all these places hold fragments of his identity, pieces of the larger puzzle that his life has become. But Italy has also become the site of accumulated disappointments, unfinished projects, and the growing sense that his approach to creative work no longer matches contemporary expectations. The choice between familiar frustration and uncertain possibility resolves itself when Leonardo recognizes that his notebooks contain investigations that may find better reception in a court less burdened by established artistic traditions. The journey across the Alps in the autumn of 1516 marks more than a change of residence. It represents Leonardo's transformation from Italian master to international sage, from local celebrity to figure of European significance. At 64, he carries with him the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime spent pushing against the boundaries of human understanding. The notebooks packed in his traveling chests contain discoveries that will influence thinking for centuries, insights that connect art and science in ways his contemporaries cannot fully appreciate. France offers the possibility of a different kind of legacy. Rather than competing with younger artists for commissions that require rapid completion, Leonardo can focus on the broader educational mission that has always underlain his investigations. Francis I wants not just paintings, but wisdom, the accumulated insights of someone who has spent decades exploring connections between different domains of knowledge. The Château de Clos-Lucé, where Francis installs his honored guest, provides the perfect setting for this final phase of Leonardo's career. Set in the Loire Valley among gardens and waterways that remind him of his beloved Italian landscapes, the chateau offers both solitude for continued investigation and access to a court genuinely interested in learning rather than merely collecting artistic trophies. As his carriage winds through the French countryside toward his new home, Leonardo experiences the complex emotions of someone who has achieved more than he ever dared hope, while recognizing how much remains forever beyond completion. The notebooks beside him contain the seeds of future discoveries, investigations that may not reach fruition until decades or centuries after his death. But they also represent a continuous thread of inquiry that has connected all the disparate phases of his remarkable career. The wanderer who began as a village boy, observing birds above the hills of Vinci, has become something unprecedented in human history. A mind that refuses to accept arbitrary boundaries between different types of understanding. Someone whose curiosity encompasses everything from the flight of insects to the movement of stars. The journey that carried him from Verrocchio's workshop through the courts of Milan, Florence, and Rome now leads toward a final destination where his true achievement can be recognized not as failed completion of individual projects, but as successful demonstration that human understanding has no necessary limits. The road ahead may be shorter than the one behind, but it leads toward possibilities that cannot be measured in terms of paintings completed or commissions fulfilled. In France, Leonardo will have the opportunity to become what he has always truly been, not just an artist or scientist or engineer, but a complete human being whose investigations prove that knowledge and beauty are different aspects of the same eternal mystery. The Château de Clos. Lucé rises from the Loire Valley like a dream made manifest in red brick and white stone, its towers catching the morning light in ways that remind Leonardo of the architectural studies he drew as a young man in Milan. But this is no commission to be completed, no patron's vision to be realized through his skill and understanding. This is home, the first true home he has known since leaving his father's house in Vinci more than 50 years ago. Francis I has provided not just shelter, but sanctuary, a place where the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime can find expression without the constant pressure of immediate practical application. The young king, barely half Leonardo's age, but possessed of an intellectual curiosity that rivals his guests, visits regularly to walk through the gardens and discuss everything from military engineering to the movements of celestial bodies. Their conversations, conducted in a mixture of Latin, Italian, and halting French, represent something unprecedented in the relationship between rulers and artists. True intellectual partnership rather than mere patronage. "Show me how water flows," Francis requests one autumn afternoon, and Leonardo leads him to the stream that winds through the chateau's grounds. Using a stick to trace patterns in the mud, the aging master demonstrates how currents behave around obstacles, how eddies form and dissipate, how the same principles that govern great rivers also apply to the flow of blood through human veins. The lesson becomes a meditation on the unity underlying all natural phenomena, the mathematical harmonies that connect the movement of planets to the spiral of a nautilus shell. These teaching moments provide Leonardo with something he has sought throughout his career, an audience capable of appreciating the connections he has spent decades discovering. Francis possesses the rare combination of practical intelligence and philosophical openness that allows him to follow Leonardo's investigations across their full range. When the master explains how his studies of bird flight inform architectural design, or how anatomical dissections reveal principles applicable to hydraulic engineering, the king responds not with polite incomprehension, but with questions that push the discussions deeper. The notebooks multiply during these French years, but their character changes subtly from the urgent investigations of Leonardo's middle period to something more reflective, more concerned with synthesis than discovery. At 65, he no longer feels the desperate need to capture every observation, to pursue every question to its ultimate conclusion. Instead, he focuses on organizing the insights accumulated over decades of investigation, creating a comprehensive vision of how different domains of knowledge relate to each other. His workshop at Clos Lucé becomes part laboratory, part museum, part teaching space. The walls display anatomical drawings that reveal the human body's hidden architecture, mechanical designs that anticipate technologies centuries in the future, studies of plants and animals that demonstrate nature's mathematical foundations. Visitors, scholars, artists, curious courtiers come to see not just the works of a famous master, but evidence of a completely different approach to understanding reality. Among these visitors, none affects Leonardo more profoundly than the young artists who seek him out as students. They come expecting to learn traditional painting techniques, but Leonardo offers something far more comprehensive, a philosophy of creative work that integrates artistic vision with scientific investigation. He shows them how to observe not just the surfaces of things, but the principles that generate those surfaces, how to see the universal patterns that connect all phenomena. The painter competes with nature, he tells them, repeating a formula that has guided his work for decades. But competition requires understanding. You cannot surpass what you do not comprehend. The lessons extend far beyond artistic technique into domains that previous generations would never have considered relevant to painting. His students learn anatomy, not just to draw human figures accurately, but to understand how life organizes itself through matter. They study optics not merely to render light and shadow convincingly, but to comprehend how vision itself creates the world we perceive. They investigate mechanics not simply to depict movement, but to grasp the forces that generate all change and transformation. Yet even as he shares his accumulated knowledge with growing generosity, Leonardo remains acutely aware of time's limitations. His right hand, paralyzed by what modern medicine would recognize as a stroke, can no longer manipulate brushes with the precision that once enabled effects no other artist could achieve. The disability forces him to dictate observations to Francesco Melzi, his devoted student and secretary, creating a strange collaboration between the aging master's vision and the young man's steady hand. This physical limitation paradoxically liberates Leonardo from certain artistic constraints. No longer able to labor over the minute details that once consumed months of patient work, he focuses instead on capturing essential relationships, fundamental principles that can be expressed through bold strokes and decisive gestures. His late drawings possess an economy and power that reflect the distillation of lifetime's experience into its most concentrated form. The portraits he completes during these years, including final adjustments to the Mona Lisa, which has traveled with him from Italy like a beloved companion, achieve an otherworldly quality that seems to transcend normal artistic categories. They exist in a temporal dimension different from ordinary painting, showing figures that appear to have been thinking for centuries, and might continue thinking for centuries more. The technique that creates these effects remains mysterious, even to Leonardo himself. They result not from conscious method, but from the unconscious application of insights accumulated through decades of investigation. His relationship with Francis deepens into genuine friendship, rare between individuals separated by such vast differences in age and social position. The king recognizes in Leonardo something beyond artistic skill or scientific knowledge, a complete human being whose investigations have revealed connections that others cannot even perceive. When courtiers question the expense of maintaining such an elaborate household for someone who completes so few finished works, Francis responds with unusual sharpness. "This man has taught me more about the nature of creation than all my tutors combined," he declares. "His presence in France is worth more than any painting he might complete." The statement reflects Francis's understanding that Leonardo represents something unprecedented, a mind that has pushed against the boundaries of human knowledge in every available direction, demonstrating that those boundaries are far more flexible than anyone previously imagined. The notebooks contain discoveries that will influence thinking for centuries, insights that connect domains previously considered separate, questions that will guide future investigation long after their author's death. Yet Leonardo himself grows increasingly conscious of his investigation's incompleteness. The notebooks contain thousands of observations, but relatively few systematic conclusions, countless questions, but relatively few definitive answers. His approach has been that of an explorer mapping unknown territories, rather than a philosopher constructing completed systems of thought. The very breadth of his curiosity has prevented the deep focus that might have yielded more conventional forms of achievement. This recognition brings not regret, but a different kind of satisfaction. He has demonstrated that human understanding has no necessary boundaries, that the same mind capable of creating beauty can also unlock nature's deepest secrets. The integration of art and science that has characterized his entire career represents not a confusion of separate domains, but a recognition of their fundamental unity. Beauty emerges from understanding. Understanding achieves its fullest expression through beautiful forms. The winter of 1518 brings increasing awareness of mortality's approach. Leonardo's body, which has served his investigations faithfully for nearly 7 decades, begins to fail in ways that cannot be reversed through observation or experimentation. But his mind remains as active as ever, continuing to perceive connections and ask questions that point toward investigations he will never have time to complete. In these final months, he spends increasing time reviewing the notebooks that contain his life's work, not with nostalgia, but with the practical concern of someone preparing his intellectual legacy for transmission to future generations. He organizes drawings into coherent sequences, adds explanatory notes to observations that might otherwise remain cryptic, dictates theoretical treatises that attempt to synthesize decades of scattered insights. Most importantly, he works with Francesco Melzi to create inventories of his various projects, ensuring that nothing will be lost through the inevitable confusion that follows any great man's death. The notebooks must survive intact, their contents available to future investigators who may possess the knowledge necessary to complete what he has begun. One evening, as spring returns to the Loire Valley, and the gardens of Clos-Lucé burst into bloom with the same mathematical precision he has observed in countless other manifestations of natural law, Leonardo experiences a moment of profound clarity about his life's meaning. Standing at his window overlooking the stream, where he has demonstrated so many principles of fluid dynamics to his royal friend, he understands that his true achievement lies not in any individual painting or invention, but in the demonstration that human curiosity has no natural limits. The boy who once watched birds above the hills of Vinci has become living proof that minds willing to question fundamental assumptions can discover connections invisible to conventional thinking. His investigations have revealed that the same forces shaping galaxies also determine the arrangement of leaves on branches, that consciousness emerges from the same natural processes that create rivers and mountains, that beauty and truth are different aspects of the same eternal mystery. Tomorrow will bring new questions, new observations, new attempts to capture in words and images the infinite complexity of the world that has fascinated him since childhood. But tonight, surrounded by notebooks that represent a lifetime's exploration of the connections binding all phenomena into unified patterns of meaning and beauty, Leonardo rests in the quiet satisfaction of someone who has pushed human understanding as far as any individual can reach, and prepared the way for others to continue the journey toward horizons he can envision, but will never personally explore. May arrives at Château du Clos-Lucé with the gentle insistence of seasons that have marked time, since long before human consciousness first wondered at their passage. In the gardens, flowers bloom according to patterns Leonardo has studied and sketched countless times, the spiral arrangement of petals, the mathematical precision of leaf placement, the subtle variations that nature creates within fundamental laws. But this spring, he observes these familiar marvels with the heightened awareness that comes from knowing they may be seen for the last time. At 67, Leonardo da Vinci faces the one mystery that has eluded all his investigations: the transition from consciousness to whatever lies beyond the threshold of individual existence. His body, which has carried his restless intellect through 7 decades of exploration, weakens with each passing day. The paralysis that began in his right hand now affects his entire side, making movement difficult and fine work impossible. Yet his mind remains as active as ever, continuing to perceive connections and formulate questions that point toward investigations he will never complete. Francis I visits daily during these final weeks, their conversations now taking on the character of philosophical testament rather than casual intellectual exchange. The young king understands that he is witnessing something unprecedented, the end of a life that has pushed human understanding further than any individual before or since. These bedside discussions become Leonardo's final opportunity to transmit insights that cannot be captured in notebooks, wisdom that emerges only from a lifetime spent questioning fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. "What have you learned?" Francis asks one afternoon as spring light slants through the chateau's tall windows, illuminating the dust motes that drift between them like visible thoughts. It is a question that encompasses everything: 7 decades of investigation, thousands of drawings, countless hours spent observing the behavior of water and the flight of birds, the anatomy of human hearts, and the mathematics underlying all natural forms. Leonardo considers the question with characteristic precision. How does one summarize a life spent discovering that boundaries between different types of knowledge are artificial constructs, that the same principles governing the movement of planets also determine how blood flows through veins, that consciousness emerges from the same natural processes that shape rivers and mountains? "I have learned," he says finally, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who has looked deeply into the fundamental structure of existence, "that everything teaches us if we know how to look. The eye, which is called the window of the soul, is the principal means by which understanding may most fully appreciate the infinite works of nature. Through seeing, we comprehend not just surfaces, but the principles that generate all visible forms." It is a statement that encapsulates his entire approach to creative work, the conviction that true art emerges from deep understanding of natural phenomena, that beauty and truth are different aspects of the same eternal mystery. But more than artistic philosophy, it represents his fundamental belief about human potential, that minds willing to question everything can discover connections invisible to conventional thinking. The notebooks surround his bed like faithful companions, their pages filled with observations that span every domain of human knowledge. Francesco Melzi, now more than student or secretary but spiritual heir to Leonardo's intellectual legacy, organizes these accumulated insights with the devotion of a monk preserving sacred texts. Both men understand that the true measure of Leonardo's achievement lies not in individual paintings or inventions, but in the demonstration that human curiosity has no natural boundaries. As his strength fades, Leonardo experiences the strange phenomenon of time becoming elastic, expanding and contracting in ways that seem to mirror the temporal distortions he has observed in his studies of motion and perception. Memories from childhood, watching birds above the hills of Vinci, learning to read the secret language of flowing water under his grandfather's patient guidance, seem as immediate as yesterday's conversations with Francis. The boy who once wondered why leaves have different shapes has become the man whose investigations reveal that nature's apparent diversity emerges from underlying mathematical unities. His thoughts turn often to the unfinished projects that will remain forever incomplete. The great bronze horse of Milan, destroyed before it could be cast, the Battle of Anchiari, ruined by experimental techniques that failed under environmental pressure. The countless mechanical devices sketched in notebooks but never built. The anatomical treatise that might have revolutionized medical understanding. The comprehensive theory of painting that could have provided future artists with systematic knowledge of optical principles. Yet this incompleteness no longer troubles him as it once did. He recognizes now that his true achievement lies not in any single work, but in the demonstration that human understanding can encompass everything from the microscopic structure of plant cells to the cosmic movements of celestial bodies. His investigations have proven that the artificial boundaries between art and science, theory and practice, observation and imagination, are obstacles to be overcome rather than divisions to be respected. The paralysis spreads gradually, but his vision remains sharp enough to observe the subtle changes that mark his body's preparation for its final transition. He notes these phenomena with the same clinical precision he once brought to dissecting corpses in Milan's hospitals, understanding that death offers the ultimate investigation into the relationship between consciousness and matter. What happens when the brain that generates thoughts ceases to function? Do the patterns of neural activity that constitute individual awareness simply dissolve back into the larger patterns that govern all natural phenomena? These questions occupy his mind during the long nights when sleep becomes increasingly elusive. If consciousness emerges from purely physical processes, as his anatomical investigations strongly suggest, then death represents not translation to another realm, but simply the end of the temporary organization of matter that created the illusion of separate existence. Yet this recognition brings not despair, but a different kind of peace. the understanding that individual consciousness participates in larger patterns that continue beyond any single lifetime. On May 2nd, 1519, as dawn breaks over the Loire Valley and birds begin their ancient songs in the chateau's gardens, Leonardo da Vinci dies in his bed at Clos-Lucé. Legend holds that King Francis, arriving moments too late to speak final words with his friend, cradles the master's head as his last breath escapes into the spring air. Whether historically accurate or not, the story captures something essential about Leonardo's final years: the recognition, by at least one powerful contemporary, that this death represents not just the loss of a talented individual, but the end of an unrepeatable exploration into human possibility. The immediate aftermath reveals how little even his closest associates understand about the scope of his achievement. Francesco Melzi, inheriting the bulk of Leonardo's papers, recognizes their value, but lacks the breadth of knowledge necessary to organize them systematically. Salai, Leonardo's longtime companion, receives several paintings, including what may be a second version of the Mona Lisa, but he views them primarily as valuable possessions rather than revolutionary artistic statements. The notebooks themselves face an uncertain fate. Written in mirror script that few can read, filled with observations that span disciplines not yet formally recognized, containing insights that will not be understood for centuries, they represent a kind of intellectual time capsule waiting for future ages to develop the knowledge necessary to appreciate their contents. Within decades of Leonardo's death, the process of dispersal begins. Melzi dies in 1570, and his heirs, lacking understanding of the paper's significance, allow them to be scattered across Europe through sale, theft, and simple neglect. Codices find their way into royal collections, private libraries, and monastic archives, their contents largely forgotten as artistic fashion moves in directions that seem to make Leonardo's integration of art and science irrelevant to contemporary concerns. Yet even as his physical legacy scatters, Leonardo's intellectual influence begins its slow but inexorable spread through human consciousness. Artists studying his techniques discover approaches to representing light and shadow that seem almost magical in their effectiveness. Engineers examining his mechanical designs find principles that anticipate developments not achieved until the Industrial Revolution. Anatomists reviewing his dissection drawings encounter observations that will not be rediscovered for centuries. The full recognition of his achievement requires the development of modern scientific method, the emergence of disciplines that can appreciate his integration of theoretical understanding with practical investigation. Only when art and science begin to reconverge in the 20th century do scholars fully grasp what Leonardo accomplished. The demonstration that human knowledge forms a unified field in which artificial boundaries between different types of understanding simply dissolve under sufficiently penetrating investigation. His paintings, meanwhile, achieve a kind of immortality that transcends their creator's mortality. The Mona Lisa becomes perhaps the most famous image in human history, her enigmatic expression speaking to something universal about consciousness confronting its own mystery. The Last Supper, despite the technical failures that have required constant restoration, continues to move viewers through its revolutionary integration of psychological insight with mathematical composition. Even his unfinished works, the Saint Jerome, the Adoration of the Magi, influence artistic development for centuries through their demonstration of possibilities that other artists spend lifetimes attempting to achieve. But perhaps Leonardo's deepest legacy lies in the example he provides of what human curiosity can accomplish when freed from arbitrary constraints. In our age that divided knowledge into rigid categories, he demonstrated that the same mind capable of creating beauty could also unlock nature's deepest secrets. His notebooks prove that observation and imagination, careful measurement and visionary speculation, practical problem-solving and theoretical understanding can work together to push the boundaries of human achievement further than anyone previously thought possible. Standing today in museums where his drawings reveal the hidden architecture of human hearts, or in reconstructed workshops where his mechanical designs anticipate technologies not developed until our own era, visitors encounter something more than historical artifacts. They witness evidence of human potential that remains relevant across centuries, proof that individual consciousness, however brief its existence, can discover connections that illuminate the fundamental structure of reality itself. The boy from Vinci, who once watched birds above Tuscan hills and wondered about the forces that enable flight, became living demonstration. That wonder, properly directed through patient investigation, can transform not just individual understanding, but the entire human relationship with the natural world. His fall marks not failure, but completion, the end of a life that proved human curiosity has no natural boundaries, that pushed understanding as far as any single lifetime can reach, and that prepared the way for future investigations he could envision but never personally conduct. In the Loire Valley, spring continues its ancient cycle, flowers blooming according to the mathematical patterns he studied so carefully, water flowing according to the principles he traced so precisely, light behaving according to the laws he discovered through decades of patient observation. The physical presence that once animated these investigations has dissolved back into the larger patterns from which it emerged, but the insights remain, encoded in notebooks and paintings that continue to teach anyone willing to look with Leonardo's patient attention to the infinite complexity of existence itself.